When I walked into Culhane Technologies for my first day as their new chief executive officer, I never expected to see my ex-husband's face turn ashen with shock. The same man who had ended our 15-year marriage with a cold text message while I was at my mother's funeral now stood frozen in the boardroom, realizing that the company's mysterious new leader, the one about to expose years of corporate fraud, was the woman he had so callously discarded. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The security guard handed me my temporary visitor badge with a smile, but the contract in my briefcase clearly stated Chief Executive Officer. The glass and steel headquarters of Meridian Technologies loomed against the morning sky, sunlight reflecting off its windows like 1,000 watching eyes. I adjusted my tailored charcoal suit and took a deep breath, savoring the weight of the moment. After 6 months of secret negotiations with the board, today was the day I would step into my role as CEO, and the day Arthur would discover exactly who he'd be answering to. "Good morning, ma'am. Your name?" The security guard at the reception desk smiled professionally. "Farah Winters," I replied, the name still feeling strange without Mitchell attached to it. The name I'd reverted to after Arthur had decided our marriage wasn't worth even a face-to-face ending. "Ah, yes. You're expected upstairs." He handed me a visitor badge. "This temporary ID will get you through all the doors today. HR will sort out your permanent credentials after the announcement." I clipped the badge to my lapel, suppressing a smile at the irony. "Visitor," it read, though the contract I'd signed last month designated me as the new chief executive officer of one of the country's most prestigious tech firms, the very same firm where Arthur had built his career while I supported him from the shadows. The elevator ascended smoothly to the 42nd floor. My heart pounded not from nervousness, but anticipation. 3 years ago, I had been nothing more than Arthur's wife to the people in this building. Then I became Arthur's ex-wife, dismissed with a text message while standing at my mother's graveside. "This isn't working anymore. I've moved on. Don't come home. Papers to follow." 15 years of marriage ended in 14 words. Today, I would be their leader. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a bustling executive floor. Through the glass walls, I could see various department heads gathering for the morning briefing. Most of them didn't know me, wouldn't recognize me. Arthur had always kept me separate from his work life, insisting that mixing business and personal matters was unprofessional. How convenient that philosophy had been for him. I walked confidently toward the reception desk outside the main conference room. The young woman looked up with a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm Farah Winters. I believe I'm expected." Recognition flickered in her eyes, though she maintained her professional composure. "Of course, Ms. Winters. The board members are already inside. The announcements will begin in approximately 40 minutes. "Thank you," I replied, glancing at my watch. 9:20 a.m. The official announcement of my appointment was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. "Is there somewhere I can wait until then?" "Of course. I can show you to a private office until the meeting begins." As she stood to escort me, the conference room door opened, and several executives filed out. Arthur emerged last, his attention fixed on the tablet in his hands. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, new lines around his eyes, a touch of gray at his temples. Success had aged him, or perhaps it was guilt. I lowered my head slightly, turning toward the reception desk as if reviewing something. Not yet. The moment wasn't right. "Eleanor," Arthur called to the receptionist, "send these briefing notes to the department heads and make sure everyone's ready for the big announcement at 10. The board's being very mysterious about this new CEO." My pulse quickened. He had no idea. "Right away, Mr. Mitchell," Eleanor responded, returning to her desk, as Arthur headed toward his corner office. She turned to me apologetically. "I'm sorry about the delay, Ms. Winters. Let me show you to the waiting area." Actually, I said, an idea forming. Is that small office still available? The one near the conference room? I gestured toward what had once been a secondary meeting. Space strategically positioned with a clear view of Arthur's office. Eleanor looked surprised. You know the building layout? I smiled. I did my research. She led me to the small office where I settled in with a clear sightline to Arthur's desk through the glass walls. Perfect. I opened my briefcase and removed a sleek leather portfolio containing the documents that would reshape Meridian Technologies forever, including evidence of the financial irregularities I'd spent the last 3 years meticulously documenting. The files told a damning story. Systematically falsified earnings reports, misappropriated research funds, and environmental compliance violations that had been buried through creative accounting, all of it bearing Arthur's signature or approval. The board had been stunned when I presented my findings during our confidential meetings, leading directly to their unanimous decision to bring me into clean house. My phone vibrated with a text from Samantha Rivera, the board chairwoman. Everything. Set for 10 a.m. The conference room is prepared. Are you ready? I smiled, remembering Samantha's expression when I'd first presented my evidence. The shock had quickly given way to calculated determination. Culhane's stock would take a hit when the irregularities eventually came to light. But, with proper management and transparency, they could weather the storm. They needed someone with intimate knowledge of the situation, but untainted by the scandal. Someone with financial forensics expertise and a personal stake in setting things. Right. They needed me. I texted back, ready, in position. Through the glass, I watched Arthur moving about his office, commanding attention on a phone call, gesturing emphatically. Same expensive suit, same authoritative stance, same dismissive wave when an assistant tried to interrupt him with what was likely important information. The next 30 minutes passed with excruciating slowness. Executives and managers began filtering into the conference room. I noticed several board members arriving, their expressions carefully neutral as they nodded subtle acknowledgments in my direction when passing by the small office where I waited. At 9:55 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Samantha. We're ready for you. Main conference room. I gathered my materials, took a deep breath, and stepped into the hallway. The moment 3 years in the making had arrived. As I approached the conference room, I could see Arthur through. The glass walls, sitting confidently at the table, one seat removed from the head position, the CEO's chair. He was chatting amiably with Curtis Bradley from legal, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. Samantha met me at the door, her expression professional but her eyes revealing satisfaction at what was to come. Ms. Winters, welcome to Meridian Technologies. The room fell silent as heads turned toward me. Arthur continued speaking to Curtis for a moment before registering the change in atmosphere. He looked up, his sentence trailing off mid-word as our eyes met for the first time in 3 years. Confusion clouded his features first, recognition without comprehension. What was his ex-wife doing here? Then the pieces began to connect as he noticed my position beside Samantha, the board chairwoman's hand on my shoulder, the deferential posture of other board members. Ladies and gentlemen, Samantha began, her voice carrying the authority of her position. Before we make the formal announcement to the company, I wanted to personally introduce you to Meridian Technologies' new Chief Executive Officer, Farrah Winters. Arthur's face drained of color, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrests of his chair. The visitor badge suddenly felt feather-light against my lapel. Many of you may not know Ms. Winters, Samantha continued, but she brings exceptional qualifications to this position. With her background in corporate finance forensics and her comprehensive understanding of Meridian's unique challenges, the board voted unanimously to bring her leadership to our company during this critical transition period. I stepped forward, placing my portfolio on the table as all eyes followed my movements. My voice, when I spoke, was Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Steady and clear. The voice of someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. Thank you, Chairwoman Rivera. I look forward to working with all of you as we address the significant issues facing Meridian Technologies and chart a course toward genuine transparency and sustainable growth. My gaze settled on Arthur, who looked as though he might be sick. Some of you might be wondering about my familiarity with Meridian's operations despite coming from outside the company. The subtle emphasis on outside wasn't lost on Arthur, whose breathing had become visibly uneven. For those who don't know me, I continued, opening my portfolio to reveal the damning documentation. I was once Farah Mitchell, and I believe it's time we discuss the actual financial position of this company, starting with these irregularities in the quarterly reports. As I began distributing copies of the financial analysis, Arthur's shock transformed into something darker, a cornered, desperate realization. In a single morning, he had lost not just his authority, but his carefully constructed facade. And the woman he had discarded like yesterday's trash now held the power to expose everything. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as understanding dawned on the faces around the table. This wasn't just a leadership change. It was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. The conference room had fallen so silent you could hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning. I remained standing at the head of the table, watching as executives flipped through the pages of financial evidence I'd provided. Their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror as they absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. Arthur sat frozen, his complexion ashen against his navy suit. The man who had once commanded every room he entered now seemed to be shrinking before my eyes. These numbers can't be accurate. Curtis from legal finally broke the silence, his voice strained. This would suggest systemic misrepresentation of our financial position for at least 3 years. 5 years, I corrected, maintaining my composure. The pattern begins subtly in 2019, but becomes increasingly bold by 2021. I tapped a particular spreadsheet in their packets. Note the discrepancy between reported R&D expenditures and actual fund allocation. Nearly $40 million rerouted through shell companies and listed as legitimate research costs. Samantha Rivera nodded grimly. The board has verified Ms. Winter's findings through an independent forensic accounting firm. The evidence is irrefutable. Arthur's breathing had become shallow, visible in the rapid rise and fall of his chest. His eyes darted around the room, assessing allies, finding none. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a forced casualness that fooled no one. There's clearly some misunderstanding. These allocations were all approved through proper channels for special projects with confidential parameters. I met his gaze steadily. Are you referring to Project Obsidian? The one registered to Westlake Holdings, which, interestingly, shares a mailing address with your lake house in Vermont? A muscle twitched in his jaw. The lake house, purchased during our marriage but mysteriously excluded from our divorce settlement. I'd discovered its connection to Culhane's missing funds only after months of painstaking investigation. I think we should continue this discussion privately, Arthur said, attempting to regain control of the situation. This is a complex matter with sensitive implications for the company. That's precisely why we're discussing it here, Samantha interjected firmly. Culhane Technologies has operated in shadows for too long. The board has unanimously decided that transparency begins now in this room with these executives. I nodded my thanks to Samantha before continuing. To address the immediate concerns, yes, the company is in a precarious position. Yes, there will be legal and financial consequences. But with proper leadership and complete transparency, Culhane can weather this storm and emerge stronger. And you believe you're that leadership? Arthur's voice dripped with sudden venom, his shock giving way to anger. A woman who's never run anything more complex than our household budget? Several executives shifted uncomfortably at his naked hostility. I allowed myself a small smile before responding. While you were building your career at Culhane, Arthur, I wasn't just running our household budget. I was completing my MBA in corporate finance. I was building a consultancy specializing in financial forensics. And for the past 3 years, I've been turning around companies that faced far worse situations than Culhane's current predicament. I paused, letting this sink in. Throughout our marriage, Arthur had dismissed my career aspirations, insisted that his work was enough for both of us. He'd never bothered to notice when I'd shifted from supporting his dreams to quietly building my own. Your most recent client being Frameworks International, Curtis said suddenly, recognition dawning on his face. You're the consultant who uncovered the embezzlement scheme that saved them from bankruptcy. He turned to the others. Frameworks. Stock has doubled since they reorganized under her guidance. Arthur's face contorted with disbelief. This is absurd. You can't possibly— The board didn't choose Ms. Winters despite her connection to you, Arthur. Samantha cut in. We chose her because she has the unique combination of skills and intimate knowledge of Culhane that we need right now. The fact that you were once married is irrelevant to her qualifications. But we all knew that wasn't entirely true. My personal history with Arthur had given me insights no outside consultant could have acquired, access to conversations, patterns, and details that had ultimately led me to unravel his financial deception. Now, I continued, returning to the matter at hand, let's discuss immediate action items. First, we need to prepare for controlled disclosure to the SEC. Second, we need to secure all financial records to prevent any unfortunate deletions. My eyes flicked meaningfully to Arthur. And third, we need to restructure the executive team effective immediately. Arthur stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. This is a witch hunt. You have no right. I have every right, I replied calmly. As of 8 this morning, I am the Chief Executive Officer of Culhane Technologies, appointed by unanimous board decision. Your position as Chief Operations Officer now reports directly to me. The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the soft ping of an incoming email on multiple devices around the table. The official company-wide announcement of my appointment, precisely timed to arrive at 10:15 a.m. Arthur's phone remained conspicuously silent. I'd instructed IT to delay his notification by 15 minutes. A small, perhaps petty victory, but satisfying nonetheless. This meeting will continue in 30 minutes, I announced, gathering my materials. I suggest you all take some time to review the documentation thoroughly. Arthur, I'll need to see you in my office immediately. Your office? He repeated, voice hollow. Yes, I replied, gesturing toward the large corner office with sweeping city views. His office until approximately 10 minutes ago. Amanda has already begun transferring your personal items to your new space. As executives filed out, murmuring urgently among themselves, Arthur remained rooted in place, his world visibly crumbling around him. When only Samantha remained with us in the conference room, his composure finally shattered. You manipulative bitch, he hissed, leaning across the table. You engineered this whole thing for revenge. Samantha stepped forward, but I raised my hand slightly, stopping her intervention. This moment had been 3 years in the making, and I wouldn't be robbed of it now. Revenge? I repeated softly. Is that what you think this is about? I gathered my portfolio and stood to my full height, looking directly into the eyes of the man who had once been my everything. The man who had ended 15 years of marriage with a text message while I stood at my mother's graveside. This isn't revenge, Arthur. This is justice. For the shareholders you've defrauded. For the employees whose jobs you've endangered. For the company you were entrusted to protect. I paused, letting my words sink in. That it happens to bring you to your knees is merely poetic. As I walked out of the conference room toward what was now my office, I heard Samantha's voice behind me, cool and professional. "Mr. Mitchell, security will escort you to your new office. Please don't attempt to access any company servers or remove any documents from the premises." My visitor badge felt impossibly light against my lapel as I stepped into my new domain. Through the glass walls, I could see the office floor buzzing with the news of my appointment, employees gathering in clusters, smartphones displaying my company headshot from the announcement email. The corner office, Arthur's inner sanctum for the past decade, was already being transformed. His golf trophies and hunting photographs had been boxed. The pretentious leather furniture was being replaced with my preferred modern pieces, and the closed wooden blinds had been opened to flood the space with natural light. Symbolic, perhaps, but necessary. A new era of transparency was beginning at Culhane Technologies, and the corner office was just the first space to feel its effects. I settled into the leather chair behind the expansive desk, now my desk. The corner office offered panoramic views of the city skyline, a visual reminder of how far I'd climbed. I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds to savor the moment, the culmination of 3 years of meticulous planning, countless sleepless nights, and a single-minded determination born in the ashes of heartbreak. My phone buzzed with a message from Coraline Hayes, the head of IT and the only executive who had secretly assisted me during my investigation. Systems access transferred. Arthur locked out of all upper-tier databases. Security protocols enacted. Also, congratulations. About damn time someone exposed him. I smiled briefly before returning to business mode. The next few hours would be critical in establishing my authority and preventing Arthur from covering his tracks or, worse, sabotaging the company out of spite. Amanda, now my executive assistant, appeared at the door. "Ms. Winters, IT has set up your credentials, and I've rescheduled your calendar for the day." She hesitated, then added with quiet satisfaction, "Mr. Mitchell is being escorted to his new office on the 3rd floor. He's not taking it well." "Thank you, Amanda." I gestured for her to close the door. "I understand you've worked with Arthur for 8 years." "Yes, ma'am." Her expression remained carefully neutral. "Then you've likely seen or heard things that might be relevant to our current situation." I met her gaze directly. "I need to know if there's anything I should be aware of immediately, particularly regarding Project Obsidian or the Westlake Holdings connection." Amanda's professional facade cracked slightly. "I've suspected something wasn't right for years. The private calls, the separate financials he wouldn't let me file properly, the meetings that disappeared from his calendar afterward." She straightened her shoulders. "I keep copies of everything, Ms. Winters, including items Mr. Mitchell thought were deleted. I hadn't expected this. An ally in Arthur's inner circle. That could be extremely valuable, Amanda. Would you be willing to share that information with our forensic team?" "Absolutely." Her response came without hesitation. "Some of us have been waiting for this day for a long time." The implications of her words settled over me. Arthur's corruption had created silent victims throughout the company, people who'd seen wrongdoing but felt powerless to act. That would end today. "Set up a meeting with Coraline from IT and the independent auditors for 2 p.m., I instructed. "And Amanda, thank you for your integrity." After she left, I turned to my computer, logging in with my new credentials. Access to the company's innermost workings now lay at my fingertips. I began with Arthur's email history, searching for communications regarding Westlake Holdings. The search returned thousands of results, many of them exchanged with an external account. Labeled only as ID, I was deep in analysis when a commotion outside caught my attention. Through the glass walls, I could see Arthur arguing with 2 security personnel near the elevator bank. His face was flushed with anger, his gestures increasingly erratic. Several employees had stopped to watch the spectacle, smartphones discreetly raised. I pressed the intercom. "Amanda, what's happening?" "Mr. Mitchell is refusing to go to his new office. He's demanding access to his old computer and files. I watched for another moment as Arthur's tirade continued. This public meltdown was exactly what I'd wanted to avoid, not for his sake, but for the company's. We needed a controlled transition, not a spectacle that would end up on social media within minutes. Ask Samantha and Curtis to join me immediately, I instructed Amanda. Then have security bring Arthur to conference room B, not here. Within 5 minutes, Samantha and Curtis arrived, both looking concerned about the developing situation. Arthur is spiraling, Curtis said without preamble. He's threatening to call major clients and tell them to pull their contracts. He's already tried contacting Gabriel Winthrop at Nexus Industries, Samantha added. Fortunately, Gabriel called me. First, he was confused by Arthur's claims that the company is being hijacked. I nodded, processing this information. Gabriel Winthrop was Culhane's largest client, representing nearly 30% of annual revenue. What did you tell him? The truth, that we're undergoing a leadership transition and will brief him personally tomorrow. He's agreed to withhold judgment until then. Good. I stood, gathering my tablet. Let's deal with Arthur now before this gets any more public. As we walked to conference room B, employees quickly averted their eyes, pretending not to watch the unfolding drama. Their curiosity was understandable. In a single morning, the company's power structure had been completely upended. Arthur was pacing the conference room when we entered, his tie loosened, hair disheveled. 2 security guards stood impassively by the door. When he saw me, his expression contorted with rage. There she is, he snarled. The woman who orchestrated this entire coup. That's enough, Arthur, Samantha said sharply. Your behavior is inappropriate and unprofessional. Unprofessional? He laughed bitterly. She's my ex-wife. This entire situation is inappropriate. The board can't possibly— The board, Curtis interrupted, made its decision based on Ms. Winter's qualifications and her evidence of your financial misconduct. Your personal history is irrelevant to that decision. Arthur turned to me, his voice dropping dangerously. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? Our entire marriage? Was it just to get close to Culhane? The absurdity of his accusation might have been comical if it weren't so offensive. We'd met in college, years before either of us had any connection to Culhane Technologies. I think you're confused about the timeline, Arthur, I replied calmly. When we married, you were a junior analyst at Markinson Financial. Culhane wasn't in either of our futures. Then why? His voice cracked slightly, genuine confusion breaking through his anger. Why this company? Why now? I considered my answer carefully, aware of Samantha and Curtis watching this exchange. Because Culhane is where the evidence led me. The financial irregularities, the misappropriated funds, the environmental violations, all of it pointed here. That you happened to be at the center of it was coincidental, a partial truth. While my investigation had indeed been based on financial evidence, I'd started looking at Culhane specifically because of Arthur. 3 months after our divorce, while still rebuilding my life, I'd noticed discrepancies in Culhane's public filings, patterns similar to cases I'd worked on professionally. Curiosity had become suspicion, and suspicion had evolved into the most thorough investigation of my career. You have 2 options, Arthur, I continued. You can accept the position of Vice President of Special Projects with appropriate oversight, or you can resign effective immediately. Either way, you will cooperate fully with the independent audit and the SEC disclosure. And if I refuse? He challenged, stepping closer. Then the board will terminate you for cause, and the evidence of financial misconduct will be included in your employment record. I kept my voice level. Additionally, the full file will be turned over to the authorities for criminal investigation. The color drained from his face as the implications sank in. You're threatening me with prison. I'm offering you a choice, I corrected. More than you gave me when you ended our marriage via text message. Curtis shifted uncomfortably, and I realized I'd allowed personal history to seep into a professional conversation. I quickly redirected. The choice is yours, Arthur, but it needs to be made now. The company announcement has gone out. The transition is happening with or without your cooperation. He stared at me for a long moment, calculation replacing rage in his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice had regained its usual controlled timbre. I'll take the VP position, temporarily, while I consider my options. I nodded, unsurprised. Arthur had always been pragmatic when cornered. Wise choice. Amanda will brief you on your new responsibilities and limitations. For now, I suggest you go to your new office and gather yourself before the all-hands meeting at 3 p.m. As security escorted him out, I noticed the subtle change in his demeanor. The way his shoulders straightened, his expression smoothed into unreadable calm. The initial shock had worn off. The calculating Arthur I knew so well was re-emerging, already plotting his next move. He's going to be a problem, Samantha murmured beside me. Yes, I agreed. But a managed problem is better than an unpredictable one. What I didn't share with Samantha was the dossier still in my briefcase, the evidence I hadn't yet presented to the board, the offshore accounts, the shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the connections to questionable investors that went far beyond mere financial impropriety. Arthur wasn't just a corrupt executive. He was the linchpin in a network that extended beyond Culhane's walls. And I had only begun to unravel the full extent of his operation. As we walked back toward the executive floor, Curtis cleared his throat uncomfortably. Farah, may I speak frankly? I nodded, curious about what the head of legal wanted to say. The personal history between you and Arthur. It complicates things from a legal standpoint. If he decides to claim this is personal vendetta rather than corporate governance. He can claim whatever he wants, I interrupted smoothly. The evidence speaks for itself. 5 independent auditors have verified my findings. The board has unanimously approved my appointment. His accusations would be dismissed as the desperate attempts of a disgraced executive to deflect attention from his own misconduct. Curtis didn't seem entirely convinced. Still, perception matters, especially with the SEC and shareholders. Which is why, I added, I've compiled a comprehensive dossier on my own involvement. Full disclosure of our past relationship, documentation of my investigation process, and independent verification of every finding. It's all there, Curtis. Transparency works both ways. This seemed to satisfy him, at least temporarily. As we reached my office, I paused, turning to both board members. Culhane Technologies is about to enter the most challenging period in its history, I said quietly. What happens in the next 72 hours will determine whether we emerge stronger or collapse under the weight of Arthur's deceptions. I need to know you're both prepared for what's coming. Samantha's expression hardened with determination. We knew what we were getting into when we reviewed your evidence, Farah. The board stands behind you. I hoped that resolve would hold when the full scope of Arthur's activities came to light. Because the financial fraud I'd presented was merely the tip of a much darker iceberg, one that, when exposed, would send shockwaves far beyond Culhane's walls. The afternoon unfolded in a blur of meetings, each one revealing new layers to Arthur's web of corruption. At 2 p.m., I met with Coraline Hayes from IT and the forensic accountants in a secure conference room we'd designated as our investigation hub. We've begun deep analysis of the server backups, Coraline reported, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she projected data onto the wall screen. Arthur thought he was covering his tracks by deleting files from the main system, but he didn't realize we maintain encrypted backups on a separate server that even executives can't access. The lead forensic accountant, a stern woman named Eleanor, Blackwood nodded appreciatively. Smart protocols. We've already identified at least 17 instances where original financial documents were altered before submission to the board or regulatory agencies. Show me, I requested, moving closer to the screen. Eleanor pulled up side-by-side comparisons of quarterly reports, original versions versus the doctored files that had been officially submitted. The discrepancies were subtle but significant. Research funds reclassified, profit margins artificially inflated, environmental compliance costs buried under vague administrative expenses. He was good, Eleanor admitted grudgingly. Most of these manipulations would go unnoticed in standard audits. It's only when you look at the pattern across multiple quarters that the deception becomes apparent. Amanda entered the room, carrying a thick folder. Ms. Winters, I found these in Mr. Mitchell's private files, the ones he kept in his personal safe rather than the company's secure document system. I accepted the folder with gloved hands, mindful of maintaining the chain of evidence. Inside were handwritten notes detailing meetings not recorded on Arthur's official calendar, many with an individual identified only as ID. The same initials from the email exchanges I'd uncovered earlier. Coraline, can you cross-reference these dates with Arthur's email communications with this ID contact? And check his building access logs for these days. See if any unregistered visitors came through security. As Coraline nodded and began typing, I continued reviewing the documents. One page caught my attention, a handwritten calculation of fund transfers between Culhane Technologies, Westlake Holdings, and a third entity labeled Obsidian Prime. The numbers were staggering. Over $120 million moved through this triangular structure in the past 2 years alone. Eleanor, what do we know about Obsidian Prime? The forensic accountant frowned. Nothing yet. It's not mentioned in any of the official company documents we've reviewed. A knock at the door interrupted us. Curtis entered, his expression grave. Farah, we may have a situation developing. Arthur's been making calls from his personal cell phone since being escorted to his new office. We can't monitor the content, but the patterns are concerning. Who has he called? I asked, immediately alert. Several numbers were still identifying, but 2 stand out. Gabriel Winthrop at Nexus Industries, and someone at the private number. For the Wall Street Journal's corporate investigative team. I processed this information quickly. He's trying to control the narrative, either by pressuring our largest client or by leaking a story that frames this transition as a personal vendetta. Exactly, Curtis confirmed. And there's more. Security. Reports he's scheduled a visitor for 4:30 p.m. today, a lawyer from Fredericks and Lowell. They specialize in executive disputes and whistleblower cases. The pieces clicked into place. Arthur was positioning himself as a whistleblower, a dedicated executive being unfairly targeted by his vindictive ex-wife. It was clever. I had to acknowledge that. If he succeeded in controlling the narrative, he could undermine my credibility before the full extent of his corruption became public. We need to accelerate our timeline, I decided. Curtis, is the press release ready for the SEC disclosure? Almost. Legal is finalizing the language to ensure we're fully compliant while minimizing market panic. Send me the draft immediately. I want it issued before close of business today. I turned to Eleanor. How quickly can your team compile a preliminary report on the financial discrepancies? We can have a top-line summary in 3 hours. It won't be comprehensive, but it will establish the pattern of intentional misrepresentation. That's sufficient for now. I faced Coraline next. I need access to Arthur's email exchanges with this ID contact as soon as possible, and full visitor logs for the past year, cross-referenced with his private calendar. As the team dispersed to their tasks, I found myself alone in the conference room, surrounded by evidence of Arthur's betrayal, not just of me, but of the entire company and its shareholders. The familiar ache of personal hurt had long since transformed into something colder and more focused, determination to expose the truth, whatever the cost. My phone buzzed with a message from Samantha. Arthur requesting private meeting with you, says it's in everyone's best interest. Thoughts? I considered the request. Meeting alone with Arthur would be risky, but it might also reveal what he was planning. After a moment's reflection, I responded, Conference room C, security outside the door. 15 minutes only. At precisely 3:45 p.m., I entered the small conference room to find Arthur already seated, his composure fully restored. The disheveled, angry man from our earlier confrontation had vanished, replaced by the calculated, charming executive I'd been married to for 15 years. "Farah," he greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for meeting with me." 15 minutes, Arthur. I'm on a tight schedule." He leaned back, studying me with newfound respect. "You know, in all our years together, I never truly appreciated your capabilities. That was my mistake. One of many," I replied evenly, refusing to be drawn into personal reminiscence. "What did you want to discuss?" "A mutually beneficial arrangement." He slid a folder across the table. "My resignation, effective immediately, in exchange for certain accommodations." I opened the folder to find a drafted resignation letter and a proposed separation agreement. The terms were breathtaking in their audacity: full severance, retention of stock options, indemnification against any financial irregularities discovered during his tenure, and a mutual non-disparagement clause that would effectively prevent the company from disclosing the reasons for his departure. "This is delusional, Arthur." "Is it?" His smile widened slightly. "Consider the alternatives. A prolonged public battle between ex-spouses at the helm of a major technology company. Accusations of personal vendetta undermining legitimate corporate governance. Shareholder lawsuits, regulatory investigations, client defections." He shrugged. "Culhane's stock would plummet, possibly beyond recovery." "You seem to be forgetting the evidence," I reminded him. 5 independent auditors have verified the financial misconduct. This goes beyond any personal history between us. Evidence can be interpreted many ways." His tone remained conversational, almost friendly. "Did you know Gabriel Winthrop and I have been friends since college? That we vacation together every summer? How do you think Nexus Industries will respond when their CEO hears that his old friend is being railroaded by his bitter ex-wife?" Maintained my poker face, though internally I was recalculating. Gabriel Winthrop controlled nearly a third of our business. If he pulled Nexus's contracts— "And the press," Arthur continued, noting my silence. "They love a scandalous narrative. Scorned wife takes revenge on corporate husband. It practically writes itself." "You're overplaying your hand, Arthur." I closed the folder and slid it back to him. "Your proposal is rejected." His expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice but to protect myself by any means necessary." "Is that a threat?" "A statement of fact." He stood slowly. "I've spent 17 years building Culhane Technologies. I won't watch you destroy it over a personal grudge." "This isn't about our divorce, Arthur." I rose to meet his gaze directly. "This is about $120 million in misappropriated funds. This is about falsified environmental compliance reports that put communities at risk. This is about securities fraud that jeopardized thousands of jobs and millions in shareholder value." A flicker of surprise crossed his face at the mention of the specific figure. He hadn't expected me to know the full extent of the Obsidian Prime operation. "You're out of your depth, Farah," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have no idea what you're interfering with or who else is involved. Some things are bigger than corporate governance or even your quest for personal justice." The implied threat hung in the air between us. For the first time, I sensed real fear beneath Arthur's calculated exterior. Not fear of exposure or professional disgrace, but something deeper and more primal. "Our 15 minutes are up," I said calmly, moving toward the door. "Security will escort you back to your office. The all-hands meeting is still scheduled for 4:30 p.m. I expect you to attend and support the transition publicly." As I reached for the door handle, Arthur called after me. "Farah." Something in his tone made me pause. "We were married for 15 years. I know you think I never loved you, but you're wrong. What I did, the text, The way I ended things. It wasn't about you. I was trying to protect you. I turned back, searching his face for any sign of manipulation or deception. Instead, I found an uncharacteristic vulnerability, almost pleading. Protect me from what, Arthur? He seemed to wage an internal battle before responding. From the consequences of knowing too much. Some questions shouldn't be asked, some stones shouldn't be turned. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of genuine distress I'd rarely seen from him. Walk away from this investigation, Farah. Take the CEO position, implement your corporate reforms, but close the inquiry into Obsidian Prime. For your own safety? The sincerity in his warning sent a chill through me. This wasn't the calculated threat of a cornered executive. This was genuine fear for my well-being. Who is ID, Arthur? The color drained from his face. How do you... He caught himself. It doesn't matter. Just know that these people operate on a different level. They don't issue warnings or make threats. They simply solve problems. Are you saying your financial fraud is connected to something criminal? Possibly violent? He moved closer, lowering his voice despite the privacy of the room. I'm saying, you need to be very careful about what you reveal at today's all-hands meeting. Stick to the leadership transition. Leave Obsidian Prime alone. If not for your sake, then for the safety of everyone in this building. With that cryptic warning, he straightened his tie and walked past me out of the conference room, nodding politely to the security officers stationed outside. I remained rooted in place, my mind racing to process this new information. Arthur's warning seemed genuine, which opened a disturbing possibility. The financial fraud I'd uncovered might be merely a symptom of something far more dangerous. Something that had prompted Arthur to abruptly sever all ties with me 3 years ago, even at the cost of our marriage. As I made my way back to the executive floor, I found Coraline waiting outside my office, her expression grim. I found something about ID, she said without preamble. You need to see this immediately. The familiar tightness of anxiety gripped my chest as I followed her inside, shutting the door firmly behind us. Whatever Arthur was involved in, I was about to discover just how deep the corruption ran, and perhaps why my husband of 15 years had suddenly decided I was a liability he couldn't afford to keep. ID is Isaiah Devereaux, Coraline explained as she closed my office door behind us. She placed her laptop on my desk and pulled up a series of documents. He's officially listed as a strategic consultant to several companies, including Culhane Technologies, but there's almost no public footprint beyond that. I studied the screen, trying to place the name. Should I know him? Probably not. He operates almost entirely in the shadows. Coraline's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up more files. What's concerning is his client list and the pattern of what happens to companies after he gets involved. She displayed a chart showing the trajectories of various corporations. Each of these companies hired Devereaux as a consultant. Within 18 months, each experienced a major restructuring event, acquisition, merger, or bankruptcy. In every case, the original executive leadership was completely replaced. Corporate raider? I suggested. That was my first thought, but it's more complex. She pulled up another screen, this one showing news headlines. These are environmental disasters connected to companies in Devereaux's portfolio, chemical spills, toxic releases, safety violations. I leaned closer, noting the dates. These all occurred during or immediately after his consultation periods. Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. She opened a new folder containing surveillance photos. These were taken at various industry events over the past 5 years. I've highlighted Devereaux in each one. The images showed a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair and penetrating eyes. In every photo, he was engaged in conversation with various executives, including, I felt my breath catch, Arthur. They appeared to be on familiar terms, sharing drinks at a charity gala in one image, leaning close in conversation at an industry conference in another. When was the earliest contact between them? I asked. Coraline scrolled to a photo dated 3 years and 2 months ago. This is the first documented meeting I could find. Note the date. I did, and felt a chill run through me. 2 weeks before Arthur had ended our marriage with that text message. There's more, Coraline continued. I cross-referenced the dates of Devereaux's meetings with Arthur against our internal records. Each meeting was followed by a significant decision regarding Culhane's environmental practices, reductions in our safety protocols, changes in waste disposal vendors, relocation of manufacturing facilities to regions with looser regulations. The implications were becoming clear, and they were far more disturbing than mere financial fraud. He's not just a corporate raider, he's something worse. Coraline nodded grimly. I think so. I dug into public records in areas where companies connected to Devereaux operated. There are clusters of unusual health issues, respiratory problems, rare cancers, neurological disorders. Nothing definitively linked to the companies, but the statistical correlation is troubling. I sat heavily in my chair, processing this information. Arthur's warning suddenly took on new meaning. If Devereaux was orchestrating environmental violations on this scale, the financial fraud might be merely a mechanism to hide the real crimes and the real profits. Have you shared this with anyone else? I asked Coraline. No. Given the sensitivity, I thought you should see it first. Good instinct. Keep this between us for now. I checked the time. 4:15 p.m. The all-hands meeting would begin in 15 minutes. Continue your investigation, but use a secure terminal not connected to our main network. And Coraline, be careful. Document everything, but store it offline. After she left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the city skyline as I recalibrated my understanding of what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about exposing Arthur's financial misconduct, or even reclaiming my professional dignity. I was potentially uncovering a criminal enterprise that endangered communities and involved people who, in Arthur's words, solved problems. My phone buzzed with a reminder for the all-hands meeting. I gathered my notes, my mind racing with new questions. How much should I reveal to the company today? How could I protect the investigation and my team while still moving forward? As I headed toward the main auditorium where hundreds of employees were gathering, Samantha fell into step beside me. You look like you've seen a ghost, she observed quietly. Something like that. I hesitated, then decided she needed to know at least part of the truth. The situation is more complex than we initially believed. Arthur may be involved with dangerous people. Samantha's expression tightened. Dangerous how? I'm still piecing it together, but I think our focus needs to shift. The financial fraud appears to be covering up environmental crimes, possibly serious ones with public health implications. She absorbed this in silence as we approached the auditorium doors. Should we postpone the meeting? No, but I'm modifying my remarks. We'll announce the leadership transition and briefly address the financial review, but I won't mention Obsidian Prime or Isaiah Devereaux. Samantha nodded, understanding the gravity of my decision. I'll support whatever you think is best. The auditorium fell silent as we entered, hundreds of employees watching with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Arthur was already seated in the front row, his expression unreadable. I noticed he had positioned himself next to Gabriel Winthrop from Nexus Industries, a power play designed to demonstrate his continued relevance and connections. As I took the stage, I felt the weight of every gaze. These people depended on Culhane for their livelihoods. Many had families, mortgages, children in college. What I said in the next few minutes would affect them all. Good afternoon, I began, my voice calm and measured despite the turmoil inside. For those who haven't seen the announcement, my name is Farah Winters, and as of this morning, I am the new Chief Executive Officer of Culhane Technologies. A murmur ran through the crowd, a mixture of surprise, confusion, and speculation. I waited for it to subside before continuing. This transition comes at a critical moment for our company. The board has identified significant challenges in our financial governance that require immediate attention. A full audit is underway, and we are committed to complete transparency with regulatory agencies. I caught Arthur's eye, noting the slight relaxation in his posture as I avoided mentioning Obsidian Prime. He thought I was heeding his warning. In the coming weeks, you'll see changes designed to strengthen our corporate governance and ensure our continued success. Some of these changes may be disruptive in the short term, but they are essential for our long-term stability and growth. I addressed the elephant in the room directly. You may have heard rumors about the nature of this transition. Let me be clear. This is not about personalities or past relationships. It is about corporate responsibility and ethical leadership. The auditorium remained silent, employees hanging on every word. Arthur Mitchell will be transitioning to the role of Vice President of Special Projects, where his institutional knowledge will remain valuable to the company. We appreciate his years of service and look forward to his continued contributions in this new capacity. Arthur rose on cue, joining me on stage with a practiced smile that appeared genuine to everyone who didn't know him as well as I did. He shook my hand firmly, playing his part in this carefully choreographed display of corporate unity. "Thank you, Farah," he said, addressing the audience. "Change is always challenging, but often necessary. I fully support this transition and look forward to working with Ms. Winters to ensure Culhane's continued success." His performance was flawless, the consummate professional accepting a new corporate reality with grace. Only I could see the calculated warning in his eyes as he added, "Culhane Technologies has always put the welfare of our clients, employees, and communities first. That commitment remains unchanged under this new leadership." The implied message was clear. Don't expose what we've been doing or everyone suffers. As Arthur returned to his seat, I concluded the formal portion of the meeting and opened the floor for questions. They came rapidly, reflecting the uncertainty rippling through the company. Will there be layoffs? Is the company in financial trouble? Will this affect our upcoming product launches? Are we being investigated by the SEC? I answered each question with as much honesty as I could without revealing the true scope of what we'd discovered. Throughout it all, I maintained eye contact with Arthur, letting him believe I was complying with his warning while plotting my next move. As the meeting concluded and employees filed out, Gabriel Winthrop approached me, Arthur hovering nearby. "Impressive. First day," Winthrop remarked, his shrewd eyes assessing me carefully. "Arthur speaks highly of your capabilities, though he seems surprised by your appointment." "Change often comes with surprises," I replied diplomatically. "Indeed." Winthrop glanced between Arthur and me, clearly sensing the undercurrents. "I look forward to our meeting tomorrow to discuss Nexus's ongoing relationship with Culhane. I assume our special arrangements will continue uninterrupted?" The emphasis on special arrangements sent a warning signal through my mind. Was Nexus involved in the environmental issues we'd uncovered? "We'll discuss all aspects of our partnership tomorrow," I assured him, maintaining a professional smile. "Culhane values transparency in all our client relationships." Something flickered in Winthrop's eyes. Concern, perhaps, or calculation. Transparency? Yes, a modern virtue, though not always conducive to business efficiency. He nodded politely. "Until tomorrow, then." As he walked away, Arthur lingered for a moment. "Smart decision in there," he said quietly. "Keeping things vague protects everyone." "I'm still investigating Obsidian Prime," I informed him, keeping my voice low. "But I'm being methodical about it." A flash of genuine fear crossed his face. "Farah, please. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Then help me understand, Arthur. Who is Isaiah Devereaux really, and what are you involved in?" His face paled at the mention of Devereaux's name. "How did you—" He stopped, composing himself. Not here. Not now. My office. 8 p.m., I instructed. After most employees have left. One chance to explain yourself, Arthur. He hesitated, then nodded almost imperceptibly before walking away, his shoulders tense with what appeared to be genuine dread. As the auditorium emptied, I remained on stage, watching the retreating figures. The day had revealed layers of corruption far beyond what I'd initially suspected. Whatever Arthur was involved in, it extended beyond Culhane Technologies, beyond our broken marriage, beyond simple financial fraud. And if my suspicions were correct, Isaiah Devereaux wasn't just a corporate consultant. He was something far more sinister. The kind of man who solved problems permanently. I checked my watch. 5:30 p.m. 2.5 hours until Arthur's explanation. Time to prepare for a conversation that might finally reveal the truth behind both our failed marriage and the dark secret at the heart of Culhane Technologies. The hours after the all-hands meeting were filled with methodical preparation. After C, briefing Samantha on what I'd discovered about Obsidian Prime, I retreated to my office with strict instructions not to be disturbed except for emergencies. I called Eleanor, the lead forensic accountant. I need everything you have on Culhane's environmental compliance record for the past 5 years. Focus on any changes in policy, reductions in safety protocols, or shifts in waste management practices. That's outside our original scope, she replied hesitantly. I know. The investigation has evolved. I need this information as soon as possible. After ending the call, I contacted a trusted former colleague from my consulting days. Celia, I need a background check on someone named Isaiah Devereaux. Deep dive, off the books, highest discretion. Sounds serious, she remarked. Timeline? Yesterday, if possible. But I'll take whatever you can get me by this evening. The financial evidence against Arthur was damning, but I sensed a deeper layer to his corruption, one that went beyond mere profit and into something potentially catastrophic. The more I uncovered about Obsidian Prime, the more disturbed I became. At 7 p.m., Coraline knocked softly at my door. I've got something. She placed a tablet on my desk, displaying satellite imagery of a remote area in eastern Nevada. This facility is officially registered as a materials processing center, owned by Obsidian Prime. I tracked shipments from 3 Culhane manufacturing plants to this location over the past 2 years. The images showed a large industrial complex, surrounded by barren landscape. What caught my attention were the discolored areas around the perimeter, sections of land that appeared contaminated or chemically altered. Is that what I think it is? I asked. Coraline nodded grimly. Toxic seepage. Based on the spread pattern, it's been happening for at least 18 months. The facility is located on private land, miles from the nearest EPA monitoring station. What are they disposing of there? I cross-referenced with Culhane's product development database. The most likely candidates are chemical byproducts from our next-generation battery technology. Specifically, the compounds that would be extremely expensive to dispose of through regulated channels. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was more disturbing than I'd imagined. Not just financial fraud to boost profits, but deliberate environmental crimes that could have catastrophic long-term consequences. Has this contamination reached any water sources? I asked, dreading the answer. Unclear from the satellite imagery alone. But there's a small town about 12 miles downstream from the facility, population around 2,000. If groundwater is affected... She didn't need to finish the thought. We both understood the implications. My phone buzzed with a text from Arthur. We need to talk, privately. It's urgent. I stared at the message, considering my options. After his performance at the all-hands meeting, Arthur clearly realized he was losing control. This urgent conversation was likely another attempt to manipulate the situation in his favor, but it also presented an opportunity. If I could get Arthur to reveal more about Obsidian Prime and his connections to it, I might uncover the full extent of his corruption before he had time to cover his tracks. I texted back, "My office, 8 p.m. Coraline looked concerned. Are you sure that's wise? Meeting him alone? He won't try anything in the company building, I assured her, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. But let's take precautions. Activate the security recording in my office and have guards stationed nearby. At 8 p.m. precisely, Arthur arrived at my door. The polished executive from the board meeting was gone, replaced by a man who appeared haggard and tense. His tie was loosened, his normally immaculate hair disheveled. "Thank you for meeting me," he began, closing the door behind him. "What I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us." I gestured for him to sit. "I'm listening." He glanced nervously around the office. "Is this room secure?" "As secure as it needs to be," I replied neutrally. "What's this about, Arthur?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You need to stop investigating Obsidian Prime. Immediately. There are things you don't understand, dangers you haven't considered. Explain. Obsidian Prime isn't just a shell company for financial fraud. It's part of a network designed to bypass environmental regulations while maintaining plausible deniability for the corporations involved." He rubbed his face wearily. "I didn't create this system, Farah. I inherited it when I became COO. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I was cataloging every word, comparing it against the evidence we'd already gathered." "Who did create it?" "A man named Isaiah Devereaux. He approached Culhane 3 years ago, offering to manage our environmental liability problem for a fee. It seemed like a corporate solution to a corporate problem. And you agreed," I noted, not bothering. To hide my disgust. "The board agreed," he corrected quickly. "I was implementing their directive." Classic Arthur, deflecting responsibility while positioning himself as merely following orders. I'd seen this pattern throughout our marriage whenever he made questionable decisions. "So why tell me this now? Why the urgent warning?" His expression shifted to something that might have passed for concern if I didn't know him so well. "Because Devereaux is dangerous, Farah. Not just corporate lawsuit dangerous. Physically dangerous. You expect me to believe you're concerned for my safety?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "Believe what you want about my motives." His eyes met mine with an intensity that might have been convincing 3 years ago. "But Devereaux has a pattern. When people start asking questions about his operation, they tend to have accidents." I studied him carefully, looking for the tells I'd learned to recognize during 15 years of marriage. The slight twitch at the corner, of his left eye when he was constructing a lie, the calculated way he maintained eye contact a beat too long. "Did you know about the contamination at the Nevada facility?" I asked, deliberately changing direction to throw him off balance. He hesitated, surprise flickering across his face. "How did you—" "Satellite imagery," I supplied. "The toxic seepage is visible from space, Arthur, and there's a town downstream that's reporting increased illness rates." He recovered quickly. "That's exactly my point. This goes beyond financial misconduct. There are real human consequences. That's why we need to handle this carefully, strategically." "We?" I repeated coldly. "Yes, we." He leaned closer. "Look, I know you have every reason to hate me. What I did, ending our marriage the way I did, was unforgivable. But right now, we need to work together to contain this situation before it spirals out of control." I allowed a moment of silence, watching him squirm slightly under my scrutiny. "Tell me about our divorce, Arthur." The abrupt change of subject caught him off guard. "What? Why did you end our marriage with a text message while I was at my mother's funeral? After 15 years together, why that method, why that timing?" His expression cycled through several emotions before settling on what appeared to be remorse. "It was a mistake." I was under immense pressure. The timing was inexcusable. That's not an explanation. That's an evasion. I leaned back in my chair. Let's try again. What was happening 3 years ago that made you end our marriage so abruptly? I already knew the answer. My investigation had uncovered his communications with Nexus Industries about their acquisition plans, but I wanted to see if he would tell the truth. Arthur sighed heavily, a performance of emotional vulnerability that once might have moved me. It was complicated, Farah. The company was at a critical juncture. I was working 18-hour days, making difficult decisions. Still not an answer, I interrupted coldly. One more try, Arthur. Why the text? Why while I was burying my mother? Something shifted in his eyes, calculation replacing feigned vulnerability. Would you believe me if I said it was to protect you? No. A humorless smile touched his lips. Smart. You always were. He straightened slightly. The truth is, our marriage had become a liability. Certain business arrangements required flexibility in my personal life. Business arrangements with Gabriel Winthrop at Nexus Industries, I supplied, watching his eyes widen slightly in surprise. Yes, I found those emails too, Arthur. His mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. Then, remarkably, he tried a new approach. It wasn't just business, he said, his voice softening. Devereaux was making threats. He showed me photos of you, at your office, at your mother's hospice. He knew your routines, your vulnerabilities. He made it clear that my cooperation ensured your safety. The audacity of this new lie was breathtaking. I stared at him, genuinely amazed by his ability to construct such a manipulative narrative on the spot. So you're claiming you divorced me? To protect me? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. He nodded earnestly. If we weren't together, if there was a clean break, you wouldn't be associated with whatever happened to me if things went wrong. It was cruel, I know, unforgivable, but I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. For a moment, I simply observed him, this man I had spent 15 years with, whose lies I had once believed, whose manipulations I had once mistaken for love. In another life, perhaps I might have fallen for this performance. Not anymore. That's quite a story, Arthur, I said finally. Creative, almost touching, if it weren't completely contradicted by your emails to Gabriel Winthrop discussing how our marriage had become an obstacle to the Nexus acquisition. His expression froze, then hardened. You don't understand the full context of those communications. I understand enough. I stood, signaling that our meeting was over. Your environmental crimes will be reported to the appropriate authorities. Your financial fraud has already been documented for the board. Whatever game you're playing with this Devereaux story ends now. He rose as well, desperation replacing the calculated charm. Farah, listen to me. Whatever you think of me, whatever evidence you've found, this is bigger than our personal history. Devereaux is real and he's dangerous. I'll take my chances, I replied coolly. As he moved toward the door, he made one last attempt. The Nevada facility. The contamination is worse than those satellite images suggest. The groundwater is already affected. The town downstream, Clearwater, has reported increased rates of illness over the past year. Skin conditions, respiratory problems, rare cancers. I paused, struck by the specificity of these details. How do you know this? Because Devereaux's people have been monitoring the situation, collecting medical data, paying off local officials to keep it quiet. A note of genuine distress entered his voice. They're preparing contingency plans, relocation of operations before the current site becomes a liability. Whether this particular information was true or another manipulation, I couldn't immediately determine. But the environmental crimes were real. That much our investigation had confirmed. If you're so concerned about public health, why didn't you stop it? I challenged. I tried to implement better containment protocols, but he stopped. Himself. You won't believe me no matter what I say, will you? You've given me no reason to, Arthur. 15 years of marriage, ended with a text message for business advantages. 3 years of financial fraud and environmental crimes. And now, when you're finally facing consequences, suddenly you're the reluctant participant, the man who sacrificed his marriage to protect his wife? I shook my head. You're right. I don't believe you. He stared at me for a long moment. Then his expression shifted to something harder, more calculating. You think you've won, don't you? That you've achieved some sort of justice by taking my position, exposing my crimes? This isn't about winning, Arthur. It's about accountability. No, he countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This is about revenge. You've spent 3 years planning this moment, orchestrating my downfall. But you have no idea what you've stepped into. As he reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed with a message from security. Unknown vehicle parked near executive entrance for past 30 minutes. 2 men inside watching building. Police notified. I showed Arthur the message. To my surprise, genuine alarm crossed his face. It's starting already, he muttered. Devereaux's people. They're watching, assessing. He turned back to me, urgency in his voice. We need to leave, separately. Now. Despite my skepticism about his Devereaux story, the security alert was real. Someone was watching the building, and given the scale of corruption I'd uncovered, taking precautions seemed prudent. I'll make my own arrangements, I told him firmly. This conversation is over, Arthur. As he left my office, his final words floated back to me. When everything falls apart, remember I tried to warn you. I watched him disappear down the corridor, his defeated posture at odds with the calculating gleam I'd seen in his eyes moments before. This wasn't over. Arthur Mitchell didn't surrender easily, especially when cornered. My phone rang. Coraline, calling from the security office. I've been monitoring the surveillance feed, she reported. Arthur's heading to the parking garage, but he's made 3 phone calls since leaving your office. We couldn't pick up the audio, but his body language was agitated. Stay on him, I instructed. And Coraline, don't trust anything he says about Devereaux or Obsidian Prime. He's manipulating the situation to save himself. Understood. But Farah? She hesitated. The SUV outside, the men have night vision equipment. They're not just watching, they're conducting surveillance. Professional surveillance. A chill ran down my spine despite my determination not to let Arthur's warnings affect me. Whether Devereaux was exactly as Arthur described, or simply a business associate with security resources, someone was indeed watching Culhane Technologies tonight. I gathered the most critical evidence into my secure briefcase, encrypting digital copies and sending backups to trusted external locations. Whatever game Arthur was playing, whether his warnings contained any truth or were purely self-serving, I would be prepared. The revenge I had planned for 3 years was nearly complete. Arthur's career was crumbling, his reputation in tatters, his crimes exposed. But as I prepared to leave the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that this victory might come with complications I hadn't anticipated. Not because Arthur's warnings were genuine, but because the scope of his corruption extended further than I had initially believed. I left Culhane headquarters through the executive parking garage, taking precautions to ensure I wasn't followed. The mysterious SUV remained in position near the main entrance, but my security team confirmed the rear exit was clear. As I drove toward my downtown apartment, my mind raced through everything I'd learned, and everything Arthur had tried to make me believe. The environmental crimes were real. Our investigation had confirmed that much. The Nevada facility was contaminating groundwater, potentially affecting an entire town. Arthur's involvement was well documented through financial transfers and approval signatures. What remained unclear was whether his warnings about Devereaux contained any truth, or were merely a desperate attempt to shift blame and create an alliance with me against a fabricated common enemy. I pulled into my building's secure garage and took the private elevator to my penthouse. Once inside, I activated the security system and called Samantha. "Are you safe?" she asked immediately. "Yes. At home, doors locked, security active. What's happening at the office?" "Arthur left about 20 minutes after you did. The SUV followed. His car." She paused. "He seemed to be expecting them, Farah. He didn't act surprised or alarmed when they pulled out behind him." This detail confirmed my suspicions. Because they're not Devereaux's men watching him. They're either private security he hired to make his story more convincing, or associates helping him maintain the charade. "That was my assessment as well," Samantha agreed. "The timing is too convenient. Just as he's spinning this tale about a dangerous conspirator, mysterious surveillance appears. Classic misdirection." I moved to my home office, powering up my secure laptop. "Have Eleanor and the forensic team found anything more about Isaiah Devereaux?" "Yes, and it's interesting. He exists, but he's not what Arthur described." I heard papers shuffling in the background. "Devereaux is a corporate consultant specializing in regulatory compliance and environmental risk management. His client list includes several Fortune 500 companies, including Culhane and Nexus. But contrary to Arthur's claims, Devereaux's recommendations have consistently pushed for stricter environmental controls, not circumvention." So Arthur twisted a legitimate business relationship into a convenient scapegoat, I concluded. Typical. What about the Nevada facility? EPA records show it was established 5 years ago as a materials processing center, initially with proper permits. But 2 years ago, the operation changed. Inspection reports became irregular, water testing decreased, and local oversight was suddenly handed to a private contractor with ties to— "Let me guess," I interrupted. "Westlake Holdings?" "Exactly. Arthur's shell company." Samantha's voice hardened. "The contamination timeline aligns perfectly with Arthur taking control of compliance oversight. If anything, Devereaux seems to have objected to these changes. We found a series of recommendations he submitted urging a return to stricter protocols. I processed this information, the final pieces of Arthur's deception falling into place. He completely inverted reality, blamed his own actions on the one person who was advocating against them. It appears so. But Farah— Samantha hesitated. While Arthur's story about Devereaux is clearly fabricated, the environmental situation in Nevada is genuine and serious. Preliminary data suggests contamination has reached the town's water supply. We're looking at potential public health effects that could trigger serious legal and ethical implications for Culhane. I closed my eyes briefly, the weight of this responsibility settling on my shoulders. My personal vendetta against Arthur had uncovered something far more significant than financial fraud. "We need to act immediately," I decided. "Contact our environmental response team. I want containment measures implemented at the Nevada site within 24 hours. Arrange for independent water testing in Clearwater, and prepare a public disclosure statement." "The board may resist immediate disclosure," Samantha cautioned. "The financial implications are secondary to public health and our legal obligations," I finished firmly. "Arthur's corruption stops now, even if it means short-term financial pain for Culhane." After ending the call, I turned my attention to the evidence we'd gathered, both against Arthur and about the environmental situation. If we moved quickly, we could mitigate the damage to public health while still holding Arthur accountable for his actions. The revenge I'd sought against him would be complete, but it would also serve a greater purpose than personal satisfaction. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Farah." Arthur's voice was tense, his breathing uneven. "Are you alone?" "What do you want, Arthur?" "To warn you one last time. The men in the SUV, They followed me to a restaurant, watched me through the window for an hour, then made a call. 20 minutes later, my car wouldn't start. The mechanics found the brake lines had been cut. I frowned, skepticism warring with caution. And yet you're perfectly fine calling me from a mysterious number. Because I was paranoid enough to check my car before driving it, he snapped. Look, believe what you want about me, about us, about why I ended our marriage. But Devereaux is real, and he's dangerous. Isaiah Devereaux is a compliance consultant who repeatedly advised Culhane to strengthen environmental protocols. Protocols you deliberately weakened, I countered. We've seen his recommendations, Arthur. He was advocating against the very actions you took. A moment of silence followed, then a low, humorless laugh. You think you've figured it all out, don't you? The brilliant Farah, always 3 steps ahead. I've verified the facts, Arthur. Something you apparently thought I wouldn't bother to do. The Devereaux you're finding in official records isn't the same man, he insisted. That's his corporate facade, his legitimate cover. Ask yourself why a respected compliance consultant would continue working with companies that repeatedly ignored his recommendations. Why he'd maintain relationships with executives who undermined his protocols. The question was actually pertinent, but I remained skeptical. Perhaps for the substantial consulting fees? Or perhaps because the consulting relationship provides perfect cover for his other operations. Arthur's voice lowered urgently. The real money isn't in giving compliance advice, Farah. It's in solving problems for corporations, permanently. I considered whether to continue engaging with what was likely another manipulation attempt. Against my better judgment, I decided to probe further, if only to understand the extent of Arthur's deception. What kind of problems? Whistleblowers, investigative journalists, community activists who notice increased cancer rates near manufacturing facilities. His voice grew more intense. Have you looked into the pattern of accidents surrounding environmental complaints against Devereaux's client companies? I had, actually. Our investigation had uncovered several suspicious incidents, but nothing definitively linked to Devereaux himself. If Devereaux is this dangerous, why involve him in the first place? I challenged. You could have simply followed regulations. Arthur laughed bitterly. You think it was my decision? Devereaux's relationship with Culhane predates my promotion to COO. He was brought in by board members with connections to Nexus Industries. I inherited the arrangement. And rather than ending it, you expanded it, I noted coldly. The Nevada facility operations increased significantly under your direction. The Michigan site was established during your tenure. The financial transfers to Obsidian Prime doubled in your first year as COO. He didn't immediately respond, and I pressed the advantage. You're trying to rewrite history, Arthur, casting yourself as the reluctant participant rather than the driving force. Just like you're attempting to reframe our divorce as some noble sacrifice rather than what the evidence clearly shows. A calculated business decision made with Gabriel Winthrop's encouragement. It wasn't that simple, he finally said, his voice strained. Nothing ever is. Save it for your deposition, I replied. The board meeting tomorrow will formalize your termination. The evidence against you is comprehensive and irrefutable. Farah. His voice took on an almost pleading quality. Whatever you think of me, be careful. Watch the board members, especially those with connections to Nexus. Don't trust Winthrop, and for God's sake, don't meet with Devereaux if he reaches out. Goodbye, Arthur. I ended the call, then immediately contacted Coraline. I need you to verify something. Arthur claims someone tampered with his car tonight, specifically cut the brake lines. Can you check if any police report has been filed? On it, she replied. 20 minutes later, she called back. No police report, but I accessed the restaurant's security camera feeds. Arthur did check underneath his car before getting in, and he did have it towed rather than driving it. I can't verify the brake lines specifically, but something made him suspicious enough not to drive. Or he staged the whole thing. I suggested. Had someone disconnect something minor to make his story more convincing? Possible, Coraline acknowledged. He certainly had time to arrange it. But Farah? I did find something else while investigating. Devereaux. She hesitated. There is a pattern of, well, convenient accidents surrounding environmental whistleblowers at companies he consults for. Nothing directly tied to him, but the statistical correlation is troubling. I considered this information carefully. Arthur could easily have known about these incidents and incorporated them into his fiction to make it more believable. Absolutely, Coraline agreed quickly, perhaps too quickly. I'm just providing all the information. After ending the call, I sat in my darkened apartment, watching the city lights below as I weighed everything I'd learned. Arthur's desperation was evident, his manipulations increasingly transparent. Yet some small details, like checking his car before driving it, suggested either a genuine concern for his safety or an elaborate performance designed to convince me of his fabricated Devereaux conspiracy. The simplest explanation was usually the correct one. Arthur was creating distractions to avoid responsibility for his actions. The evidence against him was clear and damning. His attempts to shift blame to Devereaux, to reframe our divorce as protection rather than abandonment, to position himself as a reluctant participant rather than an active orchestrator, all pointed to a man frantically trying to escape consequences. Tomorrow's board meeting would formalize his termination and my permanent appointment as CEO. The environmental remediation would begin immediately, regardless of cost. Arthur's corporate empire would crumble, and my 3-year journey toward professional vindication would reach its conclusion. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number, different from the one Arthur had called from earlier. Storage Unit 447, Blue Mountain Facility. Security code 0517. What you need is inside. Trust no one, not even the board. I stared at the message, weighing whether this was one last desperate attempt at manipulation or something else entirely. Either way, I had no intention of walking into what could easily be a trap. Whatever game Arthur was playing, I wouldn't be drawn into it. I set my phone aside and reviewed my notes for tomorrow's board meeting. In less than 12 hours, Arthur Mitchell would officially lose everything he valued: his position, his reputation, his carefully constructed facade of corporate respectability. The man who had once dismissed me with a text message would learn that underestimating me had been the most costly mistake of his life. The satisfaction of that knowledge carried me into sleep, despite Arthur's warnings and the lingering questions about what might be hidden in Storage Unit 447. As I rode the executive elevator down to the parking garage, something about Arthur's story nagged at me. The convenient timing, the elaborate tale of protection, the sudden vulnerability from a man who had never once admitted fault during 15 years of marriage. I replayed our conversation in my mind, focusing not on his words but on his mannerisms. The way his left eye twitched slightly when he mentioned Devereaux's threats, the rehearsed quality of his explanation, the calculated pause before his emotional confession. By the time the elevator doors opened, realization had dawned. Arthur Mitchell, master manipulator, corporate tactician, and my ex-husband of 3 years, was lying. Again. I stepped cautiously into the dimly lit garage, phone in hand, and texted Coraline. Need immediate background on Arthur's movements. 3 years ago. Focus on financial transactions week before divorce text. Her response came quickly. Already pulled that data. Unusual activity. $750K wire transfer to Cayman account 2 days before text. Same day as meeting with potential. Nexus Industries acquisition team. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. There had been no noble sacrifice, no protective divorce. Arthur had ended our marriage because a potential merger with Nexus had presented a more advantageous alliance, both professionally and personally. I reached my car and sat for a moment, letting cold fury replace the momentary sympathy I'd foolishly allowed myself to feel. Arthur hadn't been protecting me. He'd been protecting himself and his financial interests. The Devereaux story was likely an elaborate fabrication designed to manipulate me into hesitating, into showing mercy. I started the engine, but instead of heading toward my sister's apartment as planned, I drove directly to Culhane's secure data center across town. If Arthur was lying about our divorce, he was almost certainly lying about other aspects of the Obsidian Prime operation. I needed to verify independently before the board meeting. The night security team recognized me immediately. The advantage of being CEO, even for less than a day. Ms. Winters, we weren't expecting executives at this hour. Emergency data validation, I explained briskly. I need access to the secure terminal room. Once inside the facility's most protected space, I began methodically cross-referencing every element of Arthur's story. The results were illuminating and infuriating. Isaiah Devereaux existed, but his relationship with Culhane was far less sinister than Arthur had portrayed. He was indeed a consultant specializing in regulatory compliance, but the records showed he had actually advocated for more rigorous environmental protocols, not fewer. His recommendations had been systematically ignored or altered after submission, with Arthur's signature on each revision. The Nevada facility was real, but its environmental issues stemmed from policies implemented before Devereaux's involvement. The satellite images showing contamination were from 2 years ago. Current imagery showed remediation efforts underway. Efforts Arthur had apparently concealed from me. Most damning was an email chain I discovered between Arthur and Gabriel Winthrop, dated 3 years and 1 month ago. Marriage situation becoming complicated. F asking too many questions about new acquisition strategies. Need clean break before Nexus deal. Will handle personal situation after Munich conference. Winthrop's response had been equally cold. Personal entanglements create liability. Clean break advised. Nexus board requires clear leadership hierarchy. Without domestic complications. Your decision, but recommendation is definitive separation. The Munich conference had been the same week my mother died. The week Arthur had ended our marriage with a text message rather than face me in person. Not for protection, but for corporate advancement and personal gain. By 1 a.m., I had compiled irrefutable evidence of Arthur's actual corruption. Not the elaborate conspiracy he'd described, but something far more personal and insidious. He had sacrificed our marriage for a business deal, then spent 3 years orchestrating financial fraud for his own enrichment. The environmental issues were real, but largely of his creation, not Devereaux's. I updated the insurance file with accurate information, removing Arthur's access codes and fabrications. This was no longer our shared protection. It was my evidence against him. As dawn approached, I made my way to Culhane headquarters for the 7 a.m. board meeting, arriving deliberately early to prepare the conference room. Arthur would be expecting a united front based on our conversation. He would find something very different. The board members filed in shortly before 7, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. Samantha took her seat beside me, leaning close to whisper, "Are you all right? You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I confirmed. "But I've never been more clear-headed." Arthur arrived last, his casual entrance calculated to suggest confidence. He'd changed clothes and groomed himself immaculately, no trace of the disheveled, emotionally vulnerable man from last night. His eyes met mine, and he gave a subtle nod of solidarity. I returned it with a cold smile that stopped him mid-stride. "Good morning, everyone," I began once Arthur had taken his seat. "Thank you for convening on such short notice. Yesterday I uncovered evidence of significant financial and ethical misconduct at Culhane Technologies. I activated the presentation screen displaying the first set of documents, Arthur's systematic misappropriation of funds, his falsification of environmental reports, his offshore accounts growing fat with diverted corporate resources. What you're seeing is evidence of an elaborate fraud orchestrated primarily by one executive, I continued, my gaze fixed on Arthur as confusion, then alarm, then understanding crossed his face. Not the dramatic conspiracy involving shadowy consultants that I was led to believe, but something much more straightforward. Greed, ambition, and betrayal. Arthur's expression hardened. Farah, we discussed this. You're putting everyone at risk by exposing the truth? I interrupted sharply. There is no Isaiah Devereaux conspiracy, Arthur. I verified everything independently last night. The only person who used Obsidian Prime for personal enrichment was you. The board members exchanged glances, clearly trying to follow this unexpected confrontation. You told me Devereaux threatened my safety, that you ended our marriage to protect me, I continued, allowing a hint of personal pain to color my professional demeanor. Another lie. I found your emails to Winthrop. You ended our marriage to facilitate the Nexus acquisition. A business decision, nothing more. Arthur's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake. There are factors you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I countered, advancing to the next slide, the email exchange with Winthrop about our marriage. The board should know that Mr. Mitchell's corruption extends beyond financial fraud. He has actively misled this investigation, fabricated threats, and attempted to manipulate me into protecting him by exploiting our past relationship. Samantha leaned forward, her expression grave. Arthur, is this true? His response was to stand abruptly, knocking his chair backward. This is a personal vendetta masked as corporate governance. Farah is using her position to exact revenge for our divorce. It's inappropriate and unprofessional. That's rich, coming from the man who ended 15 years of marriage with a text message because it was convenient for his business aspirations, I replied calmly. But this isn't about our failed marriage, Arthur. It's about your betrayal of this company, its shareholders, and your fiduciary responsibilities. I advanced through the slides methodically, presenting evidence of each fraudulent transaction, each falsified report, each offshore transfer. The board watched in stunned silence as the full scope of Arthur's corruption unfolded before them. When I finished, Curtis was the first to speak. This is extensive, criminal, potentially. Definitely. Criminal, I confirmed. The evidence has already been provided to the appropriate regulatory authorities. They'll be arriving later this morning to secure additional documentation. Arthur's composure finally cracked. You had no right. We agreed to handle this internally, to protect the company. No, Arthur. You proposed that approach to protect yourself. I turned to the board. I recommend immediate termination of Mr. Mitchell's employment and full cooperation with the coming investigation. Samantha nodded grimly. I second that recommendation. The vote was unanimous, despite Arthur's increasingly desperate objections. As security was called to escort him from the building, he made one last attempt to regain control. Farah, listen to me, he pleaded, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper as the others consulted legal counsel about next steps. There are things you don't know, dangers you don't understand. Let me explain. You've explained enough, I cut him off coldly. 15 years of marriage ended with a text message while I stood at my mother's graveside. No discussion, no closure, no honesty. Just business as usual for Arthur Mitchell. For the first time, genuine emotion broke through his calculated facade. Not remorse or regret, but fury at being outmaneuvered. You think you've won? That you've achieved some sort of justice? His voice hardened to a threatening whisper. This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started. As security officers appeared at the doorway, I leaned closer to him, my voice equally low. No, Arthur. This is exactly what I've finished. The company you corrupted, the career you built on fraud, the power you abused. It's all over. And that text message you sent me? Consider this my response. 3 years in the making. His face contorted with rage as security approached. You'll regret this. When everything falls apart, you'll wish you'd listened to me. I watched impassively as he was escorted from the boardroom, his threats echoing hollowly against the evidence of his crimes. The man who had once declared I would never succeed without him was being removed from the company I now led. As the boardroom door closed behind him, Samantha placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past 3 years, the heartbreak, the determination, the meticulous planning, finally lifting. I've never been better. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as we prepared for the regulatory investigation, communicated with key stakeholders, and developed a transparent plan for addressing the financial and environmental issues Arthur had created. Through it all, I maintained my professional composure, focusing on Culhane's future rather than Arthur's demise. But in a quiet moment between meetings, standing alone in what had once been his office and was now rightfully mine, I allowed myself a moment of personal satisfaction. The revenge I had planned had evolved into something more meaningful than I had originally envisioned. Not just professional vindication, but genuine justice. The security alert from my phone interrupted my reflection. Arthur had been escorted from the building but was refusing to leave the premises, demanding to speak with me one last time. His desperation was evident in the security footage. The controlled executive mask completely abandoned, replaced by the raw panic of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. I considered ignoring his demands, letting security handle his removal. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the desire for final closure, prompted me to agree to one last confrontation. As I made my way to the lobby where security was detaining him, I steeled myself against whatever manipulation or threats he might attempt. Arthur Mitchell had lost his power over me years ago. Today had merely made that fact official. The man waiting in the security office barely resembled the polished executive from the board meeting. His tie was gone, his expression wild, his customary control shattered. 5 minutes, I informed him coldly. Then you will leave this building permanently, or you will be arrested for trespassing. His eyes, once so confident, now darted nervously around the room. You've made a terrible mistake, Farah. I tried to warn you, to protect you, but you wouldn't listen. Another performance, Arthur? Really? I shook my head in disappointment. I verified everything. The Devereaux conspiracy was your fabrication to manipulate me. Not everything I told. You was a lie, he insisted, desperation evident in his voice. The environmental issues are real. The Nevada facility is contaminated. People in Clearwater are getting sick. I know. The contamination you caused, the policies you implemented, the regulations you circumvented, all documented, all traced. Back to you. The remediation efforts will begin immediately under new leadership. He stepped closer, prompting the security officer to move protectively toward me. Farah, please. We were married for 15 years. Whatever you think of me now, you knew me then. I'm begging you to listen. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to remember the man I had once loved. Brilliant, ambitious, seemingly kind. The man who had held my hand through my father's funeral, who had celebrated every professional achievement, who had promised to love me forever. That man had died long before the text message that ended our marriage, replaced by the desperate figure before me now. Our time is up, Arthur, in every possible way. I nodded to the security officer. Please escort Mr. Mitchell from the premises. He is not to be readmitted under any circumstances. As they led him toward the exit, his final words floated back. To me, not a threat this time, but something that sounded almost like genuine fear. Watch your back, Farah. Not because of me, but because of what I've unleashed. Please, be careful. I turned away, refusing to be drawn into one last manipulation. His concern, real or feigned, was no longer my problem. I had a company to lead, corruption to address, and a future to build without the shadow of Arthur Mitchell hanging over me. The visitor badge I'd worn yesterday had been replaced by my permanent CEO credentials, the symbolism not lost on me as I rode the elevator back to the executive floor. The woman who had once been dismissed with a text message now commanded the very company that had been the catalyst for our divorce. Success, indeed, was the sweetest revenge. By noon, the news of Arthur's termination had spread throughout Culhane. Technologies like wildfire. Employees gathered in small clusters, their hushed conversations ceasing abruptly whenever I passed. Some looked concerned, others relieved, but all were watching, waiting to see how the company would weather this sudden upheaval. I maintained a deliberate calm as I moved through the executive floor, projecting the steady leadership Culhane desperately needed. Inside, however, I was processing the emotional whiplash of the morning's events. Arthur's desperate lies, his final plea, the momentary doubt his warnings had triggered despite my better judgment. My office phone rang. Gabriel Winthrop of Nexus Industries, calling precisely at 11 a.m. for our scheduled meeting. Ms. Winters. His smooth voice carried a note of careful neutrality. I understand there have been some developments this morning. Perhaps we should reschedule our discussion? On the contrary, Mr. Winthrop, I replied with equal composure. I believe our meeting is more important than ever, though I should mention it will now include representatives from the SEC and the Environmental Protection Agency. I took the liberty of inviting them to join us at 11:30. A weighted silence followed. I see. Two simple words that carried volumes of calculation. May I ask what prompted this expansion of our agenda? The security alert from my phone interrupted my reflection. Arthur had been escorted from the building, but was refusing to leave the premises, demanding to speak with me one last time. His desperation was evident in the security footage. The controlled executive mask completely abandoned, replaced by the raw panic of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. I considered ignoring his demands, letting security handle his removal. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the desire for final closure, prompted me to agree to one last confrontation. As I made my way to the lobby where security was detaining him, I steeled myself against whatever manipulation or threats he might attempt. Arthur Mitchell had lost his power over me years ago. Today had merely made that fact official. The man waiting in the security office barely resembled the polished executive from the board meeting. His tie was gone, his expression wild, his customary control shattered. 5 minutes, I informed him coldly. Then you will leave this building permanently, or you will be arrested for trespassing. His eyes, once so confident, now darted nervously around the room. You've made a terrible mistake, Farah. I tried to warn you, to protect you, but you wouldn't listen. Another performance, Arthur? Really? I shook my head in disappointment. I verified everything. The Devereaux conspiracy was your fabrication to manipulate me. Not everything I told. You was a lie, he insisted, desperation evident in his voice. The environmental issues are real. The Nevada facility is contaminated. People in Clearwater are getting sick. I know. The contamination you caused, the policies you implemented, the regulations you circumvented, all documented, all traced, back to you. The remediation efforts will begin immediately under new leadership. He stepped closer, prompting the security officer to move protectively toward me. Farah, please. We were married for 15 years. Whatever you think of me now, you knew me then. I'm begging you to listen. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to remember the man I had once loved. Brilliant, ambitious, seemingly kind. The man who had held my hand through my father's funeral, who had celebrated every professional achievement, who had promised to love me forever. That man had died long before the text message that ended our marriage, replaced by the desperate figure before me now. Our time is up, Arthur, in every possible way. I nodded to the security officer. Please escort Mr. Mitchell from the premises. He is not to be readmitted under any circumstances. As they led him toward the exit, his final words floated back. To me, not a threat this time, but something that sounded almost like genuine fear. Watch your back, Farah. Not because of me, but because of what I've unleashed. Please, be careful. I turned away, refusing to be drawn into one last manipulation. His concern, real or feigned, was no longer my problem. I had a company to lead, corruption to address, and a future to build without the shadow of Arthur Mitchell hanging over me. The visitor badge I'd worn yesterday had been replaced by my permanent CEO credentials, the symbolism not lost on me as I rode the elevator back to the executive floor. The woman who had once been dismissed with a text message now commanded the very company that had been the catalyst for our divorce. Success, indeed, was the sweetest revenge. By noon, the news of Arthur's termination had spread throughout Culhane. Technologies like wildfire. Employees gathered in small clusters, their hushed conversations ceasing abruptly whenever I passed. Some looked concerned, others relieved, but all were watching, waiting to see how the company would weather this sudden upheaval. I maintained a deliberate calm as I moved through the executive floor, projecting the steady leadership Culhane desperately needed. Inside, however, I was processing the emotional whiplash of the morning's events. Arthur's desperate lies, his final plea, the momentary doubt his warnings had triggered despite my better judgment. My office phone rang. Gabriel Winthrop of Nexus Industries calling precisely at 11:00 a.m. for our scheduled meeting. Ms. Winters. His smooth voice carried a note of careful neutrality. I understand there have been some developments this morning. Perhaps we should reschedule our discussion. On the contrary, Mr. Winthrop, I replied with equal composure. I believe our meeting is more important than ever, though I should mention it will now include representatives from the SEC and the Environmental Protection Agency. I took the liberty of inviting them to join us at 11:30. A weighted silence followed. I see. Two simple words that carried volumes of calculation. May I ask what prompted this expansion of our agenda? Transparency, Mr. Winthrop. Something Culhane Technologies is now committed to in all its partnerships. I have some very specific questions about the special arrangements you mentioned yesterday. Another pause, longer this time. Perhaps we should have this conversation privately first. I could come by your office immediately. I prefer to have all stakeholders present for our discussion. I countered smoothly. The regulators are particularly interested in Nexus Industries' relationship with certain Culhane operations. Ms. Winters. His tone shifted subtly, hardening at the edges. Before we proceed with this expanded meeting, I feel obligated to remind you that Nexus represents nearly 30% of Culhane's annual revenue. Decisions made today could have far-reaching consequences for your company's financial stability. The threat was barely veiled, but I had anticipated it. I'm well aware of our company's interdependence, Mr. Winthrop. I'm equally aware of the emails you exchanged with Arthur Mitchell regarding the dissolution of his marriage to facilitate your acquisition plans. 3 years ago. This time, the silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its polished veneer. You're making a serious miscalculation. No, you made the miscalculation when you advised Arthur to end our marriage for business reasons. Consider our 11:30 meeting your opportunity to mitigate the consequences of that error in judgment. I look forward to seeing you then. I ended the call before he could respond, then immediately dialed Samantha. Winthrop's been warned. He'll either try to cancel or come in with legal reinforcements. We're prepared either way, she assured me. The regulators arrived 15 minutes ago. They're reviewing the preliminary evidence in the secure conference room. And Arthur? Security confirms he left the premises, but he's made several attempts to contact board members directly. No one has engaged. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. Have Curtis prepare termination paperwork for anyone else implicated in this fraud. No exceptions, no matter how senior. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. I reviewed the evidence against Nexus one last time, ensuring all documentation was properly organized for the regulators. If Winthrop was as deeply involved. As Arthur's files suggested, today would mark the beginning of a significant corporate unraveling. At precisely 11:25 a.m., Amanda appeared at my door. Mr. Winthrop has arrived. He's brought Nexus's chief legal officer and someone he introduced as their head of special projects. Thank you. Please show them to conference room A. I'll join shortly. I took a moment to center myself, acknowledging the magnitude of what was about to happen. In less than 12 hours, I had gone from celebrating my personal victory over Arthur to potentially dismantling a corporate conspiracy that extended far beyond Culhane Technologies. The personal and professional had become inextricably intertwined. When I entered the conference room, the atmosphere was palpably tense. Winthrop sat stiffly at the table, flanked by his legal counsel and a severe-looking woman with a portfolio labeled Contingency Planning. Across from them sat two SEC investigators and an EPA official, their expressions professionally neutral, but their attention sharply focused. Samantha and Curtis had positioned themselves strategically near the door, a subtle security measure we had agreed upon earlier. Thank you all for coming, I began, taking my seat at the head of the table. As CEO of Culhane Technologies, I've called this meeting to address certain business practices that have recently come to light. Practices that involve both our company and Nexus Industries. Before we proceed, Winthrop's legal counsel interjected, we need to clarify that Nexus Industries has no knowledge of or involvement in any potentially improper actions by former Culhane executive Arthur Mitchell. I smiled thinly. That's an interesting opening position, considering I haven't yet specified what those actions were. The lawyer flushed slightly as I activated the presentation screen, displaying the first of many damning documents. What you're seeing is an email exchange between Arthur Mitchell and Gabriel Winthrop from 3 years ago, discussing the need to end Mitchell's marriage before finalizing certain acquisition arrangements between our companies. Winthrop's expression remained carefully controlled, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his chair. While distasteful, a personal decision regarding marriage hardly falls within SEC jurisdiction, his lawyer noted. You're absolutely right, I agreed, advancing to the next slide. However, the financial transactions that followed certainly do. These transfers, totaling over $120 million, moved through a triangular structure involving Culhane Technologies, Nexus Industries, and a shell company called Obsidian Prime. The SEC investigators leaned forward, their interest visibly piqued. The purpose of these transfers, I continued, was to conceal environmental compliance costs associated with manufacturing processes at both Culhane and Nexus facilities. Rather than properly disposing of hazardous materials through regulated channels, both companies diverted these materials to unauthorized facilities, primarily in Nevada, Michigan, and Arizona. I turned to the EPA representative. The environmental impact documentation is included in your briefing package, including satellite imagery of the Nevada site showing significant contamination of surrounding soil and potential groundwater effects. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented evidence of the joint corporate malfeasance, financial fraud, environmental violations, and deliberate concealment from regulators and shareholders. Throughout my presentation, Winthrop's expression gradually transformed from controlled confidence to grim realization as the extent of the documented evidence became clear. When I finished, the senior SEC investigator spoke first. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of corporate fraud I've seen in 20 years with the Commission. We'll need to expand our investigation immediately to include Nexus Industries. Winthrop's lawyer attempted damage control. My client is prepared to cooperate fully, of course. If improper activities occurred, they were without the knowledge or approval of senior leadership. Save it. I interrupted, sliding a final document across the table. Email from Gabriel Winthrop to Arthur Mitchell, dated 18 months ago. Disposal cost savings exceeding projections. Board pleased with arrangement. Maintain current protocols and expand to Michigan operation when ready. Hardly sounds like an uninvolved executive, does it? Winthrop finally broke his silence. You have no idea what you've done, Farah. This goes beyond corporate politics or your personal vendetta against Arthur. My actions aren't driven by vendetta, Gabriel, but by legal and ethical responsibility. Something you and Arthur apparently discarded along with my marriage. His expression darkened. Your self-righteousness is both naive and dangerous. There are factors at play you don't understand. Another threat? Arthur tried the same approach this morning. It didn't work then either. The EPA representative cleared his throat. In light of the evidence presented, we'll need to secure all relevant records immediately and initiate testing at the affected sites. Nexus Industries will be receiving formal notices of investigation by the end of day. As the meeting concluded and the various parties gathered their materials, Winthrop made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. He approached me directly, speaking low enough that only I could hear. Do you think this ends with Arthur? With me? There are board members at both our companies who authorized these arrangements. People with political connections, with resources you can't imagine. His voice dropped further. Arthur was trying to warn you, not manipulate you. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. I met his gaze steadily. Is that supposed to frighten me into silence? It's too late for that, Gabriel. The evidence has been secured, distributed to multiple agencies, and backed up in locations you'll never access. Whatever consequences come, they're inevitable now. Something like genuine concern flickered in his eyes. Then I hope you've prepared for them, Farah. Because they're coming, whether you believe me or not. As he was escorted from the conference room, I remained outwardly composed, but his words had struck an unsettling chord. The same warning Arthur had given, delivered now by someone who had every reason to discredit me, not protect me. Back in my office, I found Coraline waiting, her expression troubled. I've been monitoring communications since Arthur's termination, she reported. There's been unusual activity, encrypted messages between board members at Nexus, calls to unlisted numbers, private jets being chartered. Expected reactions to the investigation announcement, I suggested, though uncertainty nagged at me. Maybe. She hesitated. But there's something else. I did more digging on Devereaux after our conversation last night. He's real, Farah. And he's dangerous. Ex-military intelligence, specialized in problem resolution for corporations. The pattern of accidents surrounding whistleblowers? That's documented, not fabricated. A chill ran through me as pieces began realigning in my mind. What if Arthur's warning contained elements of truth, even if wrapped in self-serving lies? What if the Devereaux threat was real, even if Arthur had manipulated it for his own purposes? Keep monitoring, I instructed Coraline, but enhance security protocols. Move all sensitive data to air-gapped systems. And Coraline, take personal precautions. Use the secure apartment we discussed for the next few days. After she left, I sat alone in the gathering afternoon shadows. The victory I'd savored that morning now tempered by growing uncertainty. The revenge I'd sought against Arthur had been achieved. He was disgraced, removed from power, facing potential criminal charges. But in the process, had I inadvertently stepped into something far more dangerous than a personal vendetta? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Storage Unit 447, Blue Mountain Facility, Security Code 0517. What you need is inside. Trust no one, not even the board. Despite everything, despite the lies and manipulation, something in Arthur's final desperate warning had rung true. And now I had to decide, was this one last deception, or the first honest warning he'd given me in years? The satisfaction of revenge suddenly felt hollow against the possibility that I had underestimated the true nature of what I'd uncovered. As CEO of Culhane Technologies, I had achieved everything I'd planned these past 3 years, but as I stared at Arthur's cryptic message, I wondered if the price of that achievement might be higher than I had ever anticipated. The morning of my second day as CEO dawned with a clarity that matched my resolve. I arrived at Culhane headquarters early, stepping into the building with a confidence that came from knowing Arthur's desperate attempts at manipulation had failed. His career was over, his reputation in ruins, and today would formalize what everyone already knew. Farah Winters was in command. The executive floor hummed with anticipation as I walked toward the boardroom. Employees nodded respectfully, their expressions a mixture of awe and curiosity. The story of my rise to power, and Arthur's spectacular fall, had spread throughout the company like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Amanda met me at my office door, tablet in hand. The board is already gathering. SEC representatives arrived 15 minutes ago and are reviewing the documentation in the conference room. She lowered her voice. Arthur has been trying to contact several board members directly. No one's taking his calls. Good. I set my briefcase on the desk. Any update on Gabriel Winthrop? Nexus Industries released a statement this morning distancing themselves from Arthur's alleged misconduct and emphasizing that any arrangements between the companies were standard industry practice. She handed me her tablet, displaying Nexus's carefully worded press release. Mr. Winthrop has canceled today's meeting, citing a scheduling conflict. I scanned the statement, noting the strategic vagueness and implicit denial. Rats fleeing a sinking ship. Has the EPA team left for Nevada? Departed at 5 a.m. They should be on site now, implementing the initial containment measures. Perfect. I returned the tablet and gathered my materials for the board meeting. Let's make history, Amanda. The boardroom fell silent as I entered, all eyes turning toward me. Samantha nodded from her position at the head of the table, while Curtis shuffled nervously through his papers. The other board members, mostly men who had known Arthur for years, watched me with expressions ranging from grudging respect to barely concealed apprehension. Good morning, I began, taking my seat. Thank you all for convening on such short notice. Yesterday's revelations were undoubtedly disturbing, but today we take decisive action to correct course. I placed a document on the table. This is Arthur Mitchell's formal termination paperwork, citing gross misconduct, financial fraud, and environmental negligence. It requires board approval to be finalized. Curtis cleared his throat. Ms. Winters, while the evidence against Mr. Mitchell is certainly concerning, some board members have expressed interest in hearing his side directly before proceeding with termination. I raised an eyebrow. His side? The financial records speak for themselves, Mr. Bradley. The falsified environmental reports bear his signature. The offshore accounts are registered in his name. Nevertheless, an older board member, Harold Madison, interjected, Arthur has been with Culhane for 17 years. Some feel we owe him the courtesy of a formal defense. I studied Madison carefully. He had been one of Arthur's staunchest allies over the years, and according to our investigation, had signed off on several questionable financial transfers related to Obsidian Prime. Mr. Madison, I replied evenly, may I remind the board that Arthur had ample opportunity to explain himself yesterday. Instead, he attempted to manipulate the narrative with increasingly desperate fabrications. Further delay serves no purpose except to potentially allow evidence to disappear. Samantha nodded in agreement. The regulatory authorities are already involved. Postponing decisive action could be interpreted as corporate obstruction. Madison's expression tightened, but before he could respond, the boardroom door opened. A young assistant entered, whispering urgently to Samantha before placing a newspaper on the table. You might want to see this, Samantha said, sliding the paper toward me. The headline blazed across the front page of the Wall Street Journal's business section, Culhane Technologies rocked by fraud allegations. CEO Arthur Mitchell faces termination. Below it, a smaller subheading read, New CEO Farah Winters, former wife of Mitchell, uncovers years of financial and environmental misconduct. The article contained details that could only have come from someone inside Culhane, specific amounts, dates, project names. Arthur had clearly gone to the press in a desperate attempt to control the narrative. It seems Mr. Mitchell has chosen to make this public, I noted calmly, though inwardly I was seething at his attempt to frame the story around our personal history, which makes our decision even more urgent. The board members exchanged glances, their leverage for delay evaporating with the public exposure. Even Madison seemed to recognize the futility of further resistance. I moved to approve the termination, Samantha stated firmly. Seconded, another board member quickly added. Tatuad. Vote was taken. 9 in favor, 1 abstention, Madison, 0 opposed. Arthur Mitchell was officially terminated as an employee of Culhane Technologies, effective immediately. Now, I continued, to address the environmental situation. Our team is already implementing containment measures at the Nevada facility, but we need to discuss public disclosure and remediation costs. For the next hour, we worked through the complex implications of Arthur's environmental crimes. The board, perhaps sensing the gravity of the situation or simply recognizing the inevitability of regulatory action, approved a comprehensive response plan with minimal resistance. By mid-morning, we had established a $50 million emergency fund for environmental remediation and community health services for affected areas. As the meeting concluded, my phone buzzed with a text from security. Arthur Mitchell attempting to enter building. Security denied access per your instructions. He's becoming belligerent. I excused myself and moved to the window overlooking the main entrance. Below, I could see Arthur engaged in a heated argument with security personnel. His normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated further, suit wrinkled, hair disheveled, gestures wild and erratic. Even from a distance, I could see the desperation in his body language. Should we call the police? Samantha asked, joining me at the window. Not yet, I replied. Let's see if he leaves on his own. After several more minutes of arguing, Arthur finally retreated to his car. A rental, I noticed, perhaps supporting his claim about the brake lines in his own vehicle. As he slammed the door and sped away, I felt a surprising lack of satisfaction. The man I'd once loved, who had built his career on manipulation and deceit, had been reduced to this. A desperate figure shouting at security guards outside the building he once commanded. You did the right thing, Samantha said quietly. His actions put thousands of people at risk, employees, shareholders, communities near those facilities. I know. I turned away from the window. Has anyone checked that storage unit he mentioned? In his text? Samantha looked surprised. I thought we agreed it was likely a trap. It probably is, I acknowledged. But I'm curious. What final desperate card does he think he can play? I'll have security investigate, she offered. Carefully, with all proper precautions. Back in my office, I found Amanda fielding a barrage of media inquiries. Everyone wants a statement about the Wall Street Journal article, she reported. And Mr. Winthrop from Nexus has suddenly found time in his schedule. He's requesting a meeting this afternoon. How convenient, I remarked dryly. Schedule him for 3 p.m. and prepare a press statement focusing on our environmental remediation efforts and commitment to corporate responsibility moving forward. Minimize references to Arthur personally. She nodded, clearly understanding my strategy. We would shift the narrative from personal drama to corporate accountability, from a battle between ex-spouses to a fundamental recommitment to ethical business practices. As Amanda left to draft the statement, I finally allowed myself a moment of reflection. The revenge I had plotted for 3 years was complete. Arthur had lost everything. His position, his reputation, his carefully constructed facade of success. The text message that had ended our marriage had set in motion a chain of events he could never have anticipated, culminating in his complete professional destruction. Yet victory felt different than I had imagined. Not hollow, exactly, but complex, tinged with memories of better times, of the man Arthur had been before ambition corrupted him completely. Perhaps the greatest victory wasn't seeing him destroyed, but recognizing that I had transcended the pain he'd caused me, transforming it into a strength that had carried me to heights he never believed I could reach. My reflection was interrupted by a call from Coraline. "We've accessed the storage unit Arthur mentioned," she reported, her voice tight with tension. "You need to see what's inside, Farah. It's not what any of us expected." "What did you find?" "Documents. Hundreds of them. Financial records dating back 5 years, board meeting minutes that appear to have been altered in the official files, and—" She hesitated. "Private correspondence between board members, including Harold Madison, discussing environmental violations in explicit terms. They knew, Farah. They all knew." I processed this information. If legitimate, these documents suggested Arthur wasn't solely responsible for the environmental crimes. The entire board had been complicit. "Is there anything about Devereaux?" I asked, still skeptical about Arthur's most dramatic claims. "Nothing explicit," Coraline replied. "But there are notes referencing a special consultant and problem resolution strategies that sound ominous." "Bring everything to my office," I instructed. "And Coraline, tell no one else about this yet." After ending the call, I stood by the window, watching the city below as I contemplated this new development. Arthur's final message might have contained some truth after all. Not about his noble intentions or Devereaux's shadowy conspiracy, but about broader culpability within Culhane's leadership. If the board had been complicit all along, my revenge against Arthur had inadvertently uncovered something far more significant: a systemic failure of corporate governance that extended beyond one man's corruption. As CEO, I now had both the power and responsibility to address this broader corruption. The revenge that had motivated me for 3 years had evolved into something more meaningful: a genuine opportunity to transform Culhane Technologies from within, to correct not just Arthur's wrongs, but an entire culture of ethical compromise. My phone rang, Gabriel Winthrop calling directly rather than through assistants. "Ms. Winters," his voice carried forced cordiality. "I thought perhaps we might speak privately before our meeting this afternoon." "I prefer to have our full discussion with all relevant parties present, Mr. Winthrop," I replied coolly, "including our legal team." A brief pause. "I think you'll find that approach unnecessarily adversarial. We've been partners for many years." "Partners in what, exactly?" I challenged. "The relationship between our companies seems to have extended beyond normal business arrangements." Another pause. Longer this time. "I believe we could reach a mutually beneficial understanding if we discussed matters directly. CEO to CEO." The implied offer was clear. A deal to protect both companies' reputations, likely at the expense of Arthur and perhaps a few sacrificial executives. A neat resolution that would leave the system intact while creating the appearance of accountability. "I'll see you at 3, Mr. Winthrop," I replied firmly. "Bring your lawyers." As I ended the call, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Arthur's downfall had been personally satisfying, but it was just the beginning. The documents from the storage unit, if authentic, offered a path to more comprehensive change, a chance to address not just one man's corruption, but an entire network of corporate malfeasance. The revenge I had sought against Arthur was complete. What remained now was justice on a much larger scale. By 2 o'clock, Coraline had arrived with the contents of Arthur's storage unit, 3 large boxes of meticulously organized documents. I cleared my conference table and began methodically reviewing the files, quickly realizing their significance. These are original board minutes, I noted, comparing them with the official versions in our corporate records, extensively edited before being entered into the company archives. Samantha examined another stack of papers. Correspondence between Harold Madison and at least 4 other board members discussing containment strategies for the Nevada facility issues. They knew about the contamination as early as 2 years ago. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, not just for Arthur, but for nearly half the board. While Arthur had been the primary architect of the financial fraud, the environmental crimes had been a collaborative effort, sanctioned at the highest levels of Culhane's governance structure. Arthur saved these as insurance, I realized. Protection against being the sole scapegoat if the situation ever came to light. But why give you access to them now? Coraline questioned, her expression puzzled. He's essentially handing you weapons against his allies. Because his allies have already abandoned him, I replied, recalling the morning's board vote and Nexus's carefully worded press release. Arthur's being sacrificed to protect everyone else. This is his revenge against those who won't protect him. Ironic that Arthur's final move would be to provide me with the tools to extend my purge beyond him to the broader corruption within Culhane. In attempting to salvage something from his downfall, he'd inadvertently empowered me further. We need to approach this carefully, Samantha cautioned. Half the board implicated at once could destabilize the company completely. Agreed, I nodded. We start with Madison, Arthur's strongest ally and the most explicitly implicated in these documents. We present him with evidence of his involvement and offer him the opportunity to resign voluntarily before the next SEC interview. And Winthrop? Coraline asked. These files show Nexus was more than just peripherally aware of the environmental issues. That's why he suddenly wants a meeting, I smiled thinly. He's realized Arthur might have documentation implicating Nexus. We'll let him make his pitch, then present our evidence and terms. As we formulated our strategy, my phone buzzed with a text from security. Arthur Mitchell has returned, parked across street watching building. Security monitoring. I moved to the window, spotting Arthur's rental car positioned with a clear view of the main entrance. His desperation was evolving into something more concerning, an obsessive need to regain control of a situation spiraling far beyond his grasp. Increase security protocols, I instructed Coraline, and have someone keep eyes on Arthur. If he attempts to enter the building again, call the police immediately. At precisely 3 o'clock, Gabriel Winthrop arrived for our meeting, accompanied by Nexus Industries' general counsel and a third man introduced only as a senior advisor. They were escorted to my office, where I waited alongside Samantha and Culhane's legal team. Ms. Winters, Winthrop greeted me with forced cordiality. Thank you for making time on what must be a challenging day. Every day brings new challenges, Mr. Winthrop, I replied evenly, and new revelations. We exchanged pleasantries for several minutes, dancing around the true purpose of the meeting until Winthrop finally came to the point. This unfortunate situation with Arthur Mitchell, he began carefully, while concerning, need not affect the long-standing partnership between our companies. That depends, I countered, on the nature of that partnership. Our investigation has uncovered some aspects that appear to extend beyond normal business relations. Winthrop's counsel shifted uncomfortably. If you're referring to the environmental compliance methodologies, Nexus Industries categorically denies any knowledge of improper activities. Interesting position, I remarked, sliding a folder across the table, especially given these communications between your environmental team and Obsidian Prime regarding the special disposal protocols for the Nevada site. The attorney reached for the folder, but Winthrop intercepted it, opening it himself. His expression remained carefully controlled as he reviewed the contents, but I noted the slight tightening around his eyes, recognition that his position was more precarious than he'd anticipated. These appeared to be standard technical consultations, he said finally, closing the folder. Nothing improper. Page 4 references explicitly bypassing EPA monitoring requirements, I pointed out. Page 7 discusses alternate chemical classifications. To avoid triggering regulatory thresholds, neither practice is remotely standard or legal. The senior advisor spoke for the first time, his voice calm but authoritative. Perhaps we should discuss potential resolutions rather than interpretations of past communications. Both our companies have an interest in moving forward constructively. I agree completely. I smiled. Constructive resolution begins with accountability. Culhane Technologies is implementing comprehensive environmental remediation at all affected sites and establishing a $50 million fund for community health services. We would expect Nexus Industries to match this commitment, given your equal participation in these operations. Winthrop's face flushed. That's completely reasonable, the advisor cut in smoothly, though the specifics would require further discussion. I studied this unnamed advisor more carefully, noting his calm confidence amid Winthrop's growing agitation. He hadn't been introduced properly, but carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to managing crises. There's another matter, I continued. Certain communications between you and Arthur Mitchell regarding the terms of our divorce 3 years ago. Specifically, your advice that our marriage had become an obstacle to potential business arrangements. Winthrop's composure finally cracked. That's entirely personal and irrelevant to current corporate matters. On the contrary, Samantha interjected, it establishes a pattern of ethical breaches and inappropriate business considerations extending to personal relationships. The SEC would find it highly relevant to understanding the broader culture that facilitated the financial and environmental misconduct. As Winthrop struggled to formulate a response, a commotion erupted in the outer office. Raised voices, something heavy falling. The door burst open, and Arthur appeared, disheveled and wild-eyed, having somehow evaded security. You, he snarled, pointing at Winthrop. You promised if I took the fall alone, they'd protect me. Now the SEC is freezing my accounts and no one's returning my calls. Security personnel appeared behind him, grabbing his arms, but the damage was done. The naked desperation and explicit acknowledgement of a coordinated cover-up hung in the air, impossible to ignore or explain away. Winthrop sat frozen, his careful facade of ignorance shattered by Arthur's unplanned interruption. The unnamed advisor's expression had darkened, his calculating gaze shifting between Arthur and me as security dragged my ex-husband from the room. I believe this meeting is concluded, I stated calmly into the stunned silence that followed. Our legal team will be in touch with terms for Nexus Industries' participation in the remediation efforts. I suggest you consider them carefully, given what we've just witnessed. Winthrop and his counsel departed quickly, but the advisor lingered, approaching my desk after the others had left. Impressive work, Ms. Winters, he said quietly. Not many could have orchestrated such a comprehensive unraveling in just 2 days. I didn't orchestrate Arthur's appearance just now, I replied honestly. Though it certainly clarified matters. Indeed. He placed his business card on my desk. When the dust settles, I'd be interested in discussing Culhane's future direction. My associates and I specialize in helping companies navigate transitions. I glanced at the card. It bore only a name, Isaiah Devereaux, and a phone number. You're not what Arthur described, I observed, keeping my expression neutral despite my surprise. Few things are, he replied with a thin smile, including Arthur Mitchell. Good day, Ms. Winters. After he departed, I sat in momentary silence, processing this unexpected development. Arthur's description of Devereaux as some shadowy criminal mastermind had been yet another manipulation, a distortion of a real person into a convenient villain for his narrative. That was Devereaux, Samantha? Asked incredulously after I explained. The supposed criminal mastermind from Arthur's story? Another of Arthur's exaggerations, I confirmed, though not a complete fabrication. Based on his demeanor, Devereaux is clearly someone accustomed to managing corporate crises behind the scenes. "What do we do about Arthur?" she asked. "That outburst won't be his last. He's unraveling completely." I considered our options. Arthur's increasingly erratic behavior posed a liability to both himself and Culhane. Despite everything, I couldn't help feeling a twinge of unwanted sympathy for the man whose life was imploding so spectacularly. Have security escort him off the premises, I decided, but arrange for someone to drive him home. In his current state, he shouldn't be behind the wheel. As the afternoon progressed, news of Arthur's outburst spread throughout the company, cementing the narrative of his downfall. The man who had once commanded respect through fear now inspired only pity and whispered speculation about his mental stability. By 5 o'clock, Harold Madison had requested a private meeting, clearly sensing his own precarious position after reviewing the afternoon's events. Within 30 minutes, he had agreed to resign from the board, effective immediately, in exchange for a carefully worded separation agreement that minimized his legal exposure. "One down," Samantha remarked as Madison departed. "How many more to go?" "As many as necessary," I replied, reviewing the documents from Arthur's storage unit. "This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about fundamentally changing Culhane's corporate culture." As the workday ended and employees filtered out of the building, I remained in my office, the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on my shoulders. The revenge I had sought against Arthur was complete beyond my wildest expectations. He had lost everything: his position, his reputation, his dignity, even his allies. Yet my victory had expanded into something larger than personal vindication. I now had the opportunity and responsibility to transform the company from within, to excise the corruption that had festered under Arthur's leadership, and create something better. Perhaps that was the greatest revenge of all, not just destroying what Arthur had built, but rebuilding it into something he could never have achieved. A company defined by integrity rather than deception, by accountability rather than evasion. As night fell over the city, I gathered my things and prepared to leave, physically exhausted, but mentally energized by the clarity of purpose that had emerged from the chaos of the past 2 days. Arthur's text message 3 years ago had been meant to end something. Instead, it had been the catalyst for an entirely new beginning, not just for me, but for Culhane Technologies itself. 6 months later, the autumn sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, illuminating the space that had once been Arthur's sanctuary and was now unquestionably mine. The heavy mahogany furniture had been replaced with modern, sustainable materials. The imposing barriers that had once separated the CEO from other executives had been removed in favor of collaborative spaces and transparent glass walls. Symbolic changes, perhaps, but reflective of the deeper transformation that had swept through Culhane Technologies in the 6 months since Arthur's dramatic fall. "The final quarterly numbers, Ms. Winters," Amanda said, placing a folder on my desk. "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes. I reviewed the figures with satisfaction. Despite the initial financial hit from the environmental remediation, costs and regulatory fines, Culhane had rebounded remarkably. Our stock had not only stabilized, but begun climbing steadily as the market responded to our transparency initiatives and ethical restructuring. Perfect timing, I noted, glancing at the magazine cover framed on my wall. Forbes' latest issue featuring my portrait under the headline, "Corporate Redemption: How Farah Winters Transformed Culhane Technologies from Environmental Villain to Industry Leader." The article had detailed my journey from being dumped via text message after 15 years of marriage to becoming CEO and uncovering the corruption that had festered under Arthur's leadership. The writer had portrayed it as a personal redemption story that had evolved into corporate renaissance, which wasn't far from the truth. "The new board members have all arrived," Amanda informed me, including Dr. Eleanor Blackwood from the Environmental Advisory Committee. I nodded appreciatively. After removing 4 compromised board members, I had restructured Culhane's governance to include scientific expertise, ethical leadership specialists, and community representatives, voices that would have been dismissed as irrelevant under the old regime. As I gathered my materials for the board meeting, Coraline appeared at my door, tablet in hand. "You might want to see this before you head in." She handed me her device, displaying a news article from that morning. Former Culhane CEO Arthur Mitchell pleads guilty to financial fraud, environmental violations, faces up to 12 years in prison. The accompanying photo showed Arthur entering the courthouse, gaunt, gray, a shell of the commanding executive he had once been. His legal troubles had mounted rapidly after his dismissal from Culhane, as regulatory agencies discovered the full extent of his financial manipulations and environmental crimes. The plea deal represented the final collapse of Arthur's desperate attempts to shift blame or minimize his culpability. Several former board members had testified against him, eager to reduce their own exposure by painting Arthur as the primary architect of Culhane's corruption. His sentencing is scheduled for next month, Coraline noted. Prosecutors are pushing for the maximum. I studied the photo dispassionately, searching for any emotional response within myself. Satisfaction, vindication, even pity. Surprisingly, I felt nothing beyond a detached acknowledgement that justice was being served. The man who had once occupied so much space in my heart and mind had become almost irrelevant to my daily existence. "Thank you for the update," I said, returning the tablet. "Has there been any communication from Nexus Industries about the joint remediation project?" Their new CEO called this morning. "They've agreed to match our additional funding for the Clearwater Community Health Clinic." I smiled at this development. Gabriel Winthrop had been among the collateral damage of Culhane's cleansing, forced to resign as Nexus distanced itself from the scandal. His replacement, a woman with a background in sustainable business practices, had proven far more cooperative in addressing the environmental damage our companies had jointly caused. The board meeting proceeded smoothly, with unanimous approval for our expanded environmental initiatives and community investment projects. The new governance structure was functioning exactly as I had envisioned: collaborative, transparent, ethically grounded. Before we conclude, I addressed the board. I'd like to share some news from Clearwater, Nevada. The latest water testing shows significant improvement in groundwater quality. The remediation efforts are working more effectively than projected, and health officials are reporting decreases in respiratory complaints among residents. Dr. Blackwood nodded approvingly. "The comprehensive approach you implemented, combining immediate containment with long-term purification systems, is becoming a model for other corporate remediation projects. The EPA is considering standardizing your methodology." "It's not my methodology," I corrected gently. "It's the result of our environmental team working directly with community members to understand their needs and priorities. The most affected people have been central to designing the solution." As the meeting concluded and board members filtered out, Samantha lingered behind. In the months since Arthur's departure, she had become not just a professional ally, but a genuine friend, someone who understood the complexities of my journey from scorned wife to corporate leader. "Have you seen this?" she asked, showing me an email on her phone. "It came through the general inquiry address this morning. The message was from Arthur, sent from a personal email account. Farah." As my sentencing approaches, I find myself reflecting on the path that brought us here. While I cannot undo the damage I've caused, to Culhane, to those communities, to us, I want you to know I recognize the magnitude of my failures. The company's transformation under your leadership shows what could have been possible had I chosen differently. I understand you have no reason to respond or even acknowledge this message, but I needed to express, for whatever it's worth after everything, that you've accomplished what I never could. Building something truly meaningful from the ruins of what I destroyed. Arthur, I read the message twice, searching for manipulation or hidden agenda. Finding none, I handed the phone back to Samantha. Will you respond? She asked carefully. I considered the question. 6 months ago, I might have savored the opportunity to dismiss Arthur's overture with the same coldness he had shown me. 3 months ago, I might have crafted a response highlighting the contrast between his failures and my successes. Now, however, no, I decided. There's nothing to say that hasn't already been said through actions rather than words. His acknowledgement changes nothing about the past and adds nothing to my future. Samantha nodded, understanding the finality of my decision. Arthur Mitchell, the man who had once dominated my thoughts, whose approval I had once sought, whose rejection had once devastated me, had become simply irrelevant to the woman I now was. Later that afternoon, I left the office, early for a scheduled visit to our Nevada remediation site. As the corporate helicopter approached Clearwater, I could see the transformation below. New medical facilities, water treatment systems, revitalized community spaces funded by our remediation program. Celia Hayes, our new environmental compliance director, pointed out various projects as we descended. The community garden on the eastern edge was the residents' idea. The soil there has been completely replaced and tested. They're already growing vegetables. We toured the facilities, meeting with community leaders and site engineers. The residents' initial suspicion had gradually transformed into cautious partnership as they witnessed Culhane's commitment to genuine remediation rather than superficial damage control. Ms. Winters, an elderly woman, approached as we completed our tour. I wanted to thank you personally. My grandson's asthma attacks have decreased significantly since the new air filtration systems were installed in our homes. I'm glad to hear that, I replied sincerely. Please continue to participate in the health monitoring program so we can track long-term improvements. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape, I found myself standing alone at the edge of the remediation site. 6 months of intensive work had begun healing the environmental damage, but the process would continue for years, a long-term commitment Culhane would honor regardless of cost. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Culhane Technologies stock reaches all-time high following successful environmental initiatives and corporate restructuring. I smiled at the validation, but found it mattered less than the tangible progress surrounding me. The revenge that had once driven me had evolved into something far more meaningful, a genuine commitment to repairing damage and creating value beyond mere profit. 3 years ago, standing at my mother's graveside, I had received a text message that shattered 15 years of marriage in 14 words. The pain of that moment had fueled a determination that carried me to heights Arthur had never believed I could reach. Now, that determination had transformed into purpose that had nothing to do with Arthur at all. As our helicopter lifted off, carrying me back to the headquarters I now commanded, I watched Clearwater recede beneath us, a visible reminder that healing was possible, that destruction could be reversed, that new growth could emerge from contaminated ground. In that moment, I recognized that the most complete revenge wasn't Arthur's imprisonment or financial ruin or public disgrace. It wasn't even my professional success or public vindication. The ultimate victory was my complete liberation from the need for revenge itself, the freedom to build something meaningful that had nothing to do with him at all. Arthur Mitchell had ended our marriage with a text message because I no longer served his ambitions. In doing so, he had inadvertently set me on a path to discover strengths I never knew I possessed, to achieve success beyond what either of us had imagined possible, and ultimately, to outgrow the very need to prove him wrong. The text message that had once broken my heart had become merely a footnote in a much larger story, my story, that was still being written, one chapter at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.